noted the number of men present. Every night, he checked the bunks. The discrepancy continued, 23 in the morning, 22 at night. He could never find the extra man after dark. On the 9th day, Vickers confronted the crew during lunch. He stood at the front of the mess hall and asked if anyone could explain the count. The room went quiet. Men looked at each other. No one spoke. Finally, a young logger named Dennis Calloway raised his hand. "I thought I was going crazy," he said. "I've been counting too." Others nodded. They had noticed. They had not wanted to say anything. Vickers asked if anyone had spoken to the man in the gray jacket. A few said they had tried. He never answered. He never made eye contact. He was always alone. "Where does he sleep?" Vickers asked. No one knew. That night, Vickers stayed awake. He sat in the dark near the bunkhouse door and watched. The men came in one by one after dinner. He counted them, 22. He waited until midnight. He walked through the rows of bunks with a flashlight, counting again, 22. At 4 in the morning, he heard footsteps outside. He opened the door. The man in the gray jacket was walking toward the mess hall. Vickers called out to him. The man did not stop. Vickers followed him across the clearing. The man opened the mess hall door and went inside. Vickers was 10 steps behind him. When Vickers entered the mess hall, it was empty. He searched the kitchen, the storage room. The back exit was locked from the inside. There was nowhere to go. He stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He went back to the bunkhouse and woke Eugene Marsh. He told him what had happened. Marsh got dressed, and the two of them searched the camp. They checked every building. They walked the perimeter. They found nothing. At breakfast, there were 23 men. Vickers stopped trying to find him. He continued logging the count, but he no longer asked questions. The crew did the same. They worked. They ate. They avoided talking about it. On the 32nd day, a crew member named Lyle Brennan disappeared. Brennan had been working a section near the eastern edge of the tract. He radioed in at noon to report his position. He did not radio again. When the crew returned to camp that evening, Brennan was not with them. Vickers organized a search. They found his equipment, his saw, his radio, his water canteen, stacked neatly at the base of a cedar tree. His jacket was folded on top. They searched for 3 days. The county sent a search and rescue team. They brought dogs. They found no trace of Brennan, no footprints, no signs of injury or struggle. He was listed as missing. The morning after Brennan disappeared, Vickers counted the crew at breakfast. 22 men. He counted again. 22. He checked the sign-in sheet. 21 names. Brennan was gone, but the total count was the same as it had been for 5 weeks. 22 men. No one extra. The man in the gray jacket was gone too. Vickers closed the camp 2 days later. He told the Simpson office there had been a safety incident. He did not elaborate. The crew was paid out and sent home. Most of them never worked timber again. Vickers kept his ledger. He brought it to the Mason County Sheriff's Office in Shelton and showed it to a deputy named Frank Talbot. Talbot read through the entries. He asked Vickers if he had been drinking. Vickers said no. Talbot made a photocopy of 3 pages and filed them with Brennan's missing person report. The case was never solved. In 1994, a historian named Laura Pritchard was researching logging camps in the Olympic Peninsula. She found Vickers's ledger in a storage unit in Olympia donated by his daughter after his death. Pritchard read the entries and contacted several members of the original crew. 4 agreed to speak with her. All 4 confirmed the count had been wrong. All 4 remembered the man in the gray jacket. None of them could describe his face. Eugene Marsh, who was 71 at the time of the interview, told Pritchard that he still thought about it. "I worked timber for 40 years, he said. "I've seen men die. I've seen accidents that don't make sense. But that was different. It wasn't violent. It was just wrong. Dennis Calloway, the youngest member of the crew, said he had never gone back to the mountains. "I don't care if it sounds crazy," he said. "There was someone there who wasn't supposed to be. And when he left, someone else went with him." Camp Grisdale was dismantled in 2003. The Forest Service removed the structures and reforested the site. There is no marker. No trail leads to it. The logging road has been gated for 20 years. In 2007, a backpacker reported finding a gray jacket hanging from a tree branch near the former camp location. The jacket was clean, no tears, no weathering. It was turned over to the Forest Service and logged as abandoned property. No identification was found in the pockets. The jacket is still stored in a facility in Olympia. No one has claimed it. The trees were bleeding something that should not have existed. The Hoh River Valley cuts through the western edge of Olympic National Forest, a temperate rainforest where Sitka spruce and western hemlock grow to heights of 200 feet. The valley receives an average of 140 inches of rain each year. Moss blankets everything. The forest floor is dark, even at midday. The area has been logged intermittently since the early 1900s, though most of the interior remains untouched. The Hoh tribe has lived along the river for thousands of years. Their oral histories describe the deep forest as a place where time moves differently. In May of 1983, a private timber company called Crescent Logging secured a contract to clear a 70-acre tract along the southern ridge of the valley. The land had been surveyed and approved by the Forest Service. The trees were old-growth Douglas fir, some over 300 years old. The operation was expected to take 4 months. The crew arrived on the morning of May 9th. There were 18 men. The foreman was a man named Raymond Kowalski, who had been logging in the Pacific Northwest for 22 years. The crew set up a base camp 2 miles from the nearest access road. They began felling trees on May 11th. On the 3rd day, a faller named Thomas Garrett reported an unusual finding. He had cut into a Douglas fir approximately 9 feet in diameter. When the tree fell, a dark liquid began seeping from the interior of the trunk. Garrett radioed Kowalski. By the time Kowalski arrived, the liquid had pooled around the base of the tree. It was black, thick, and odorless. Kowalski assumed it was pitch or resin, though the color was wrong. He touched it. It was cool, not sticky. It did not adhere to his gloves. He told Garrett to continue working. By the end of the day, 6 more trees had been felled. 4 of them contained the same black liquid. It pooled in the hollows of the trunks, sometimes several gallons at a time. The substance did not evaporate. It did not soak into the ground. It sat on the surface, reflecting light like oil. Kowalski collected samples in glass jars. That night, he examined them by flashlight. The liquid was completely opaque. When he tilted the jar, it moved slowly, like syrup. He sealed the jars and stored them in a cooler. The following morning, the crew felled 11 more trees. 9 of them contained the liquid. Some had only a few ounces. Others had gallons. The substance was always in the core of the tree, never near the bark. The wood surrounding it appeared healthy. There were no signs of disease, rot, or insect damage. One of the crew members, a man named Dale Peterson, refused to continue working. He told Kowalski the trees were wrong. "I've cut timber for 15 years, he said. "I've never seen anything like this. It's not natural." Kowalski told him to take the day off. Peterson left camp and did not return. By May 16th, the crew had felled 43 trees. 31 of them contained the black liquid. The substance had begun to spread across the forest floor, pooling in shallow depressions and soaking into patches of moss. The smell had changed. It was faint, but several crew members described it as metallic, like rust or old coins. Garrett, the faller who had first discovered the liquid, began complaining of headaches. He said his vision was blurring. Another crew member, a man named Victor Salazar, reported the same symptoms. Kowalski sent both men back to base camp to rest. On May 17th, Kowalski radioed Crescent Logging's main office in Port Angeles. He described the situation and requested that a company representative come to the site. The office told him to halt operations and secure the samples. A company supervisor named Alan Driscoll arrived 2 days later. He brought a geologist and a Forest Service inspector. The three of them walked the site. They examined the felled trees. They collected additional samples of the black liquid. Driscoll asked Kowalski if any of the crew had been injured. Kowalski said no, but mentioned the headaches. Driscoll told him to send anyone experiencing symptoms to a clinic in Forks. He did not explain why. The geologist, whose name was Dr. Miriam Alvarez, took soil samples and photographed the affected trees. She did not speak to the crew. When Kowalski asked her what she thought the substance was, she said she did not know. She left the site that afternoon. The Forest Service inspector, a man named Harold Quincy, stayed longer. He measured the spread of the liquid and marked the locations of the affected trees on a map. He asked Kowalski how many trees had been cut. Kowalski told him 43. Quincy wrote the number down. He asked if any trees had been cut outside the approved boundary. Kowalski said no. Quincy walked the perimeter of the site. When he returned, he told Kowalski that the operation was suspended pending further investigation. He said the samples would be sent to a laboratory in Seattle. He gave no timeline for results. The crew left the site on May 21st. Kowalski returned to Port Angeles with the samples he had collected. He delivered them to the Crescent Logging office. A receptionist signed for them. Kowalski never saw them again. 3 weeks later, Kowalski received a letter from Crescent Logging. The letter stated that the samples had been analyzed by an independent laboratory. The results indicated that the substance was a naturally occurring byproduct of fungal decay, common in old-growth forests. The letter included no documentation, no lab reports, no names. Kowalski contacted Dr. Alvarez, the geologist who had visited the site. She did not return his calls. He contacted Harold Quincy at the Forest Service. Quincy told him the matter was closed. When Kowalski pressed for details, Quincy said the findings were consistent with environmental factors and posed no public health risk. Kowalski requested copies of the official reports. He was told the reports were not available for public release. In June of 1983, Kowalski spoke with Thomas Garrett, the faller who had first discovered the liquid. Garrett said he had gone to a clinic in Forks as instructed. A doctor examined him and ran blood tests. The doctor told him he was fine. Garrett never received a copy of the test results. Victor Salazar, the other crew member who had reported symptoms, said his headaches had stopped after leaving the site. He did not seek medical attention. He did not return to logging. Dale Peterson, the crew member who had refused to continue working, could not be located. His last known address in Forks was vacant. Attempts to reach him through family members were unsuccessful. In 1987, a graduate student named Rebecca Frost was conducting field research in the Hoh River Valley for her thesis on forest ecology. She interviewed several members of the Hoh tribe. An elder named Joseph Whitehorse told her about the 1983 logging operation. He said his grandfather had warned the tribe to avoid that section of the forest. "There are places where the old trees hold things," Whitehorse said. "You don't cut them. You leave them alone." Frost asked what he meant. Whitehorse would not elaborate. Frost later obtained a copy of the Forest Service's Environmental Impact Statement for the 1983 logging operation. The document made no mention of the black liquid. The site was described as environmentally sound, with no unusual soil or vegetation conditions noted. Frost attempted to locate Raymond Kowalski. She found an address in Port Angeles but received no response to her letters. She contacted Crescent Logging. The company told her the records from 1983 had been destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1985. The 70-acre tract was never logged. The Forest Service reclassified the area as a protected research zone in 1989. No explanation was given. Access to the site requires a special permit. Permits are rarely granted. In 2012, a hiker reported finding a fallen Douglas fir near the southern ridge of the Hoh River Valley. The tree had split open, exposing its interior. The hiker described seeing a dark, viscous substance pooling inside the trunk. The hiker took photographs. The photographs were posted online. They were removed within 48 hours. The Forest Service issued a statement saying the substance was tree sap, darkened by exposure to air and moisture. No further investigation was conducted. The photographs have not resurfaced. The hiker's identity was never confirmed. Someone kept working after everyone else had left. The Cedro Woolley Logging District sits in the foothills of the North Cascades, 30 miles east of the Skagit River. The terrain is steep and dense with second-growth forest. Logging operations in the area began in the late 1800s and continued through the 1960s. Most of the original camps were abandoned by the end of World War II, dismantled or left to rot. The region is known for heavy rainfall, landslides, and roads that wash out every winter. Records from the logging era are incomplete. Many camps operated without formal oversight. In the spring of 1947, a camp known simply as Station 12 operated along Finney Creek, a tributary that flows into the Skagit. The camp housed 23 men and processed timber from a 200-acre tract owned by North Cascade Timber Company. The operation was seasonal. Workers arrived in April and left in October. The camp closed for winter on October 19, 1947. All equipment was removed. The buildings were locked. No one was scheduled to return until the following spring. In March of 1948, a company supervisor named Gerald Hofstad arrived at Station 12 to prepare for the new season. He found the camp in disarray. The door to the main office had been forced open. Papers were scattered across the floor. A desk drawer had been left ajar. Hofstad assumed it was vandalism or theft. He filed a report with the county sheriff and began cleaning up. While sorting through the papers, Hofstad found an accounting ledger that he did not recognize. It was bound in black leather, approximately 8 inches by 10 inches, with a hand-stitched spine. The cover had no label. Hofstad opened it. The ledger contained shift logs. Each entry listed a date, a worker's name, hours worked, and tasks completed. The handwriting was small, precise, and consistent throughout. The entries began on October 20, 1947, the day after the camp had officially closed. Hofstad read through the pages. The entries continued through November, December, and January. Some days had multiple entries. Others had none. The final entry was dated March 2, 1948, 5 days before Hofstad arrived at the camp. The names in the ledger were familiar. They were men who had worked at Station 12 during the previous season, but according to company payroll, none of them had been present after October 19th. Hofstad compared the ledger to the official timesheets from the previous season. The handwriting did not match any of the workers. He checked the payroll records. No one had been paid for work after October 19th. He radioed the North Cascade Timber Office in Cedro Woolley and reported the finding. A company accountant named Dorothy Engstrom was sent to investigate. She arrived on March 10th. Hofstad showed her the ledger. Engstrom examined each entry carefully. Used in the 1940s. The handwriting showed no signs of forgery or alteration. Vukovich concluded that the entries were written by a single individual over a period of several months. Orozco attempted to locate surviving workers from Station 12. He found 3. One was Russell Kemp, who was 81 years old and living in Bellingham. Kemp remembered the letter he had received in 1947. He said he had not thought about it in decades. When Orozco showed him the ledger, Kemp became quiet. He said the handwriting looked familiar, but he could not place it. The other 2 workers, Leonard Travers and George Nguyen, had no recollection of anything unusual. Travers said he had not thought about Station 12 in over 50 years. Nguyen said he had never heard of the ledger. Orozco published a brief article about the ledger in the Skagit County Historical Society newsletter in 2005. The article included a photograph of 2 pages from the ledger. A retired logger named Walter Briggs contacted Orozco after reading the article. Briggs said he had worked at Station 12 in 1946, a year before the ledger entries began. He said there had been rumors among the crew that someone was living in the woods near the camp. Men reported seeing smoke from a fire at night and hearing footsteps outside the bunkhouses. Briggs said no one ever saw who it was. Orozco asked if anyone had investigated. Briggs said no. "You don't go looking for someone in those woods," he said. "You leave them alone." In 2007, Orozco received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as the daughter of Gerald Hofstad, the supervisor who had found the ledger in 1948. The woman, whose name was Carol Hofstad Reinhardt, said her father had kept a personal journal. In the journal, he had written about finding the ledger. He had also written that he had found something else, a stack of firewood behind the office building, neatly split and stacked. The wood had not been there when he closed the camp in October. Hofstad had not reported the firewood to the company. According to his journal, he believed someone had been living at the camp during the winter. He did not know who. He wrote that he had considered searching the surrounding area, but decided against it. Whoever it was, Hofstad wrote, they did not want to be found. Reinhardt gave Orozco a copy of the journal. Orozco added it to the Historical Society's collection. The ledger and the journal are now stored in a climate-controlled vault in Mount Vernon. Both are available for viewing by appointment. In 2009, the ledger was briefly loaned to the University of Washington for analysis. A team of historians and linguists examined the text. They noted that the language used in the entries was formal and precise, with no errors or corrections. The entries showed no signs of distress, confusion, or urgency. The writer. North does not always point the same direction. Thunder Creek Ridge runs along the eastern boundary of North Cascades National Park, a jagged spine of granite and ice that rises to nearly 8,000 feet. The ridge is remote, accessible only by a steep trail that climbs 4 miles from the valley floor. The terrain is unstable. Rock slides are common. The area receives heavy snowfall from October through May, and even in summer, temperatures rarely rise above 50 degrees. The ridge has no permanent structures, no cell service, no marked trails beyond the main approach. Hikers are advised to carry maps, GPS devices, and emergency beacons. The region has a history of surveying errors. In the 1920s, mapping teams reported discrepancies between compass readings and celestial navigation. In the 1940s, a geological survey team noted anomalies in magnetic readings near the ridge but attributed them to mineral deposits. The area was never fully mapped. When North Cascades became a national park in 1968, large sections of Thunder Creek Ridge were left unmarked on official charts. In June of 1962, the United States Geological Survey sent a 3-person team to map timber boundaries along the ridge. The team was led by a surveyor named Douglas Carmichael, who had worked in the Cascades for 12 years. The other two members were field technicians named Rita Ostrander and James Kubota. They were tasked with establishing survey markers along a 6-mile section of the ridge. The work was expected to take 2 weeks. The team set up a base camp near the southern trailhead on June 7th. They began surveying on June 9th. The first 3 days proceeded without incident. On the morning of June 12th, Carmichael recorded an anomaly in his field notes. At approximately 4:15 in the morning, Carmichael checked his compass before beginning the day's work. The needle pointed west-northwest, roughly 60 degrees off true north. He assumed the compass was damaged. He retrieved a backup compass from his pack. It showed the same reading. He woke Ostrander and Kubota. Both checked their compasses. All 3 instruments showed the same deviation. Carmichael marked their position on the map. They were standing on a flat section of the ridge, approximately half a mile from the nearest tree line. There were no visible landmarks, no power lines, no metal structures. The sky was clear. The team waited. By 5:30 in the morning, the compasses had begun to shift. By 6:15, they pointed north again. Carmichael recorded the time and location. He noted that the deviation had lasted approximately 2 hours. The following morning, the team returned to the same location at 4 in the morning. The compasses drifted again. This time, the deviation was 45 degrees. Carmichael photographed the instruments. He took soil samples. He measured the exact coordinates using a sextant and cross-referenced them with topographic maps. The location was consistent. The compasses drifted only in that specific area, and only during the early morning hours. Over the next 5 days, the team conducted repeated tests. They moved north and south along the ridge, testing compasses at different elevations and times of day. The anomaly occurred only within a quarter-mile stretch of the ridge, and only between 4 and 6 in the morning. Outside those hours, the compasses functioned normally. Carmichael documented the findings in his field report. He recommended that the area be flagged for further investigation. When the team returned to the USGS office in Seattle on June 23rd, Carmichael submitted his report to his supervisor, a geologist named Dr. Bernard Kestler. Kestler reviewed the report. He asked Carmichael if the team had experienced any equipment malfunctions. Carmichael said no. All 3 compasses had been tested and calibrated before the expedition. Kestler asked if there were any unusual weather conditions. Carmichael said the weather had been clear and stable throughout the survey. Kestler requested copies of the photographs and soil samples. Carmichael provided them. Kestler said he would forward the findings to the USGS Research Division. He told Carmichael to continue with his next assignment. Carmichael did not hear back. In August of 1962, he contacted Kestler to ask about the status of the investigation. Kestler said the Research Division had reviewed the report and found no evidence of magnetic anomalies. The soil samples showed no unusual mineral content. The photographs were inconclusive. Carmichael asked if the area would be marked on future maps. Kestler said no. The deviation was too localized and inconsistent to warrant special notation. Carmichael asked if he could conduct a follow-up survey. Kestler denied the request. He said the USGS had other priorities. Rita Ostrander spoke with a colleague about the incident later that year. The colleague, a cartographer named Ellen Vasquez, suggested that Ostrander document her observations independently. Ostrander wrote a 3-page summary and submitted it to the Journal of Geophysical Research. The journal rejected the submission without review. The editor said the findings lacked corroborating data. James Kubota mentioned the compass drift to a professor at the University of Washington in 1964. The professor, Dr. Harold Mitchum, expressed interest and asked Kubota for the exact coordinates. Kubota provided them. Mitchum said he would look into it. 3 months later, Mitchum told Kubota that he had contacted the USGS and been informed that no such anomaly existed in their records. Mitchum did not pursue the matter further. In 1964, Carmichael retired from the USGS. He kept copies of his field notes and photographs. In 1971, he submitted an article about the Thunder Creek anomaly to a regional geology journal, the Motion. Article was rejected. The editor said the findings lacked sufficient data and could not be replicated. Carmichael contacted Rita Ostrander and James Kubota, the two technicians who had been part of the original survey. Ostrander confirmed the anomaly. She said she had returned to the ridge in 1965 as part of a separate project. She had brought a compass. At 4:30 in the morning, the compass drifted. She did not report it. Kubota said he remembered the incident but could not explain it. He said he had stopped working in the field in 1963 and had no interest in revisiting the site. In 1978, a backpacker named Michael Delaney was hiking Thunder Creek Ridge. He later told a ranger that his compass had stopped working near the summit. When asked to describe the location, Delaney said it was a flat section of the ridge about half a mile from the tree line. He said the compass had spun in circles for several minutes before stabilizing. Delaney said it was early morning, just after sunrise. The ranger filed a report with the National Park Service. The report was logged as a routine equipment malfunction. No follow-up investigation was conducted. In 1983, a group of geology students from the University of Washington conducted a field study along Thunder Creek Ridge. One of the students, a woman named Laura Padilla, brought a magnetometer to measure magnetic field variations. On the morning of July 14th, Padilla recorded a localized distortion in the magnetic field. The distortion lasted approximately 90 minutes. Padilla noted the time and coordinates in her field notes. When Padilla returned to the university, she mentioned the finding to her advisor, Dr. Raymond Takeda. Takeda reviewed the data. He said the distortion was likely caused by underground mineral deposits or atmospheric conditions. He did not recommend further investigation. Padilla attempted to publish her findings in a student research journal. The paper was accepted but never printed. The journal ceased publication later that year. In 1997, a National Park Service ranger named Clifford Hansen was conducting a routine patrol along Thunder Creek Ridge. He carried a GPS unit and a compass. At approximately 5 in the morning, Hansen noticed that his compass was pointing west. He checked his GPS. The coordinates were accurate. He checked the compass again. It pointed west for 20 minutes, then corrected itself. Hansen filed a report with the park superintendent. The superintendent asked if Hansen had experienced any other equipment issues. Hansen said no. The superintendent said the compass had likely been affected by local magnetic interference. He recommended that Hansen carry a backup compass on future patrols. Hansen retired in 2004. In 2009, he was interviewed by a journalist named Sandra Kowalczyk, who was writing an article about unexplained phenomena in national parks. Hansen told her about the compass incident. He said he had returned to the ridge several times after that morning, always before dawn. The compass drifted every time. Kowalczyk contacted the National Park Service to request access to Hansen's reports. The Park Service said the reports were part of routine patrol logs and were not available for public review. Kowalczyk submitted a Freedom of Information Act request. The request was denied. The Park Service said the documents contained sensitive information related to park operations. Kowalczyk's article was published in a regional outdoor magazine in 2010. The article mentioned Thunder Creek Ridge but did not include specific coordinates. Several readers contacted the magazine to say they had experienced similar compass anomalies in the Cascades. None provided exact locations. In 2015, a team of amateur researchers attempted to replicate the compass drift on Thunder Creek Ridge. They brought multiple compasses, GPS units, and recording equipment. They camped on the ridge for 4 nights. On the third morning, at approximately 4:45, all 4 compasses drifted west by 50 degrees. The drift lasted 37 minutes. The team recorded video footage of the instruments. The footage shows the compass needles moving slowly, then stabilizing. The team uploaded the footage to a video-sharing website. The video received moderate attention but was later removed for violating the site's terms of service. No explanation was given. Copies of the video have circulated on other platforms but are difficult to verify. The National Park Service has never issued a statement about Thunder Creek Ridge. The area is not marked as hazardous. No warnings are posted. Rangers are trained to carry GPS units and advised not to rely solely on compasses. Douglas Carmichael died in 2012. His field notes and photographs were donated to the University of Washington Archives. They are stored in a collection labeled Cascade Geological Surveys, 1958 to 1965. The collection is open to researchers by appointment. The ridge is still accessible. Hikers report no unusual activity. Compasses function as expected, but there are mornings just before dawn when the needle begins to turn. The beds were waiting for someone who never arrived. Camp 12 sits in a clearing 8 miles northeast of North Bend, Washington, deep in the Snoqualmie National Forest. The camp was built in 1963 by Cascade Timber Corporation to house seasonal logging crews. At its peak, the camp supported 40 workers and operated from April through October each year. The main compound consisted of 3 barracks buildings, a mess hall, an equipment shed, and a small administrative office. The nearest road is a single-lane gravel track that floods every winter. Cell service does not reach the area. The forest around the camp is dense with Douglas fir and western red cedar, some trees over 200 feet tall. Logging operations at Camp 12 ceased in 1978 when Cascade Timber consolidated its workforce at a larger facility near Cle Elum. The buildings were locked but not dismantled. The company maintained ownership of the land and planned to reopen the camp if timber prices improved. For 11 years, the site sat empty. No caretakers were assigned. No security patrols were conducted. The forest reclaimed the perimeter. Moss grew on the roofs. Windows cracked from ice expansion. In March of 1989, Cascade Timber received a contract to clear timber from a nearby tract damaged by a windstorm. The company decided to reopen Camp 12 rather than build new facilities. A maintenance crew was dispatched to assess the site and prepare it for occupancy. The crew consisted of 4 men, a supervisor named Leonard Briggs, an electrician named Roger Yamamoto, a carpenter named Frank Delacroix, and a general laborer named Tom Whitfield. They arrived at the camp on March 20th. The crew began by inspecting the barracks. The buildings had weathered 11 winters but remained structurally sound. There was evidence of rodent activity and water damage, but no major deterioration. Briggs assigned Whitfield and Delacroix to clean the interior, while he and Yamamoto checked the electrical systems. Whitfield entered Barracks B, the middle of the 3 bunkhouses. The interior was cold and dim. Dust covered the floors. The bunks were arranged in 2 rows of 10 metal frames with thin mattresses. Most of the mattresses showed signs of mold and decay. Whitfield opened the windows to air out the building. As he walked down the center aisle, he noticed that 3 bunks near the back of the room appeared different. The mattresses were cleaner. There was no visible mold. He touched one of the mattresses. It was warm. Whitfield called Delacroix over. Delacroix touched the mattress. He confirmed it was warm, noticeably warmer than the surrounding air. They checked the other 2 bunks. Both were warm. The 3 bunks were positioned side by side along the east wall, numbers 14, 15, and 16. Briggs and Yamamoto were summoned. Briggs touched each mattress. He asked Yamamoto to check for electrical wiring beneath the bunks. Yamamoto inspected the area. There was no wiring. The barracks had not had power for over a decade. Briggs retrieved a thermometer from the supply truck. He measured the temperature of the mattresses, bunk 14, 97 degrees, bunk 15, 96 degrees, bunk 16, 98 degrees. The ambient temperature inside the barracks was 43 degrees. Briggs measured the temperature of the other bunks. All were consistent with the ambient air temperature. He checked the walls and floor near the warm bunks. No heat sources were present. No pipes, no vents. He stepped outside and examined the exterior wall. There were no signs of recent activity or tampering. The crew stood in the barracks, uncertain how to proceed. Briggs decided to document the finding and continue with the inspection. He took photographs of the 3 bunks and noted the temperatures in his daily log. The crew moved on to the other buildings. The following morning, Briggs returned to Barracks B with the thermometer. The 3 bunks were still warm. Bunk 14, 96 degrees. Bunk 15, 97 degrees. Bunk 16, 97 degrees. Briggs opened all the windows and left the door propped open to allow cold air to circulate. He returned 6 hours later. The bunks remained warm. Over the next 4 days, Briggs measured the temperature of the bunks twice daily. The readings were consistent, ranging from 95 to 98 degrees. The ambient temperature in the barracks fluctuated between 40 and 50 degrees depending on the weather. The heat did not dissipate. On March 25th, Briggs radioed the Cascade Timber office in Seattle. He spoke with the operations manager, a man named Douglas Fenton. Briggs described the situation. Fenton asked if there was any possibility of geothermal activity or underground heating. Briggs said no. The camp was not near any known geothermal sites. Fenton told Briggs to remove the mattresses and inspect the bunk frames. Briggs and Whitfield removed the mattress from bunk 14. The frame was cold. The mattress itself retained heat. They placed the mattress on the floor 10 feet away from the bunk. After 2 hours, the mattress was still warm. The bunk frame remained cold. They repeated the process with bunks 15 and 16. The results were identical. The mattresses retained heat regardless of location. The frames did not. Delacroix, the carpenter, examined the construction of the bunks. He noted that all 20 bunks in Barracks B were identical in design and materials. There was nothing structurally unique about numbers 14, 15, and 16. He suggested that perhaps the mattresses had been replaced at some point, though there was no record of such maintenance. Yamamoto, the electrician, proposed a different theory. He wondered if the warmth might be related to trapped solar radiation, though he admitted this seemed unlikely given that the barracks had been closed. Cascades. None provided specific locations. The mattresses stored in the Seattle warehouse were disposed of in 2009 during a facility closure. No records indicate what happened to them after that. They left in the night, walking the wrong way. The Forks Logging District covers roughly 300 square miles of temperate rainforest in Clallam County, Washington, along the western edge of the Olympic Peninsula. The region receives over 120 inches of rain annually. The forest is dense with Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Douglas fir. Visibility is limited even during daylight. The terrain is steep, cut through by dozens of unnamed creeks and ravines. Logging operations in the area date back to the late 1800s. By the 1970s, most camps were small, seasonal operations serving independent timber contractors. Workers lived in temporary bunkhouses, often miles from the nearest town. Communication was limited to radio and occasional supply runs. In October of 1971, a logger named Kenneth Varga woke before dawn at a camp 12 miles southeast of Forks. He was preparing for the day's work when he noticed boot prints in the mud outside the bunkhouse. The prints led away from the building, heading west into the forest. Varga recognized the tread pattern. They were his boots. He checked his feet. He was wearing the same boots. They were caked with dried mud. He stepped outside and compared his boots to the prints. They matched exactly. But the prints were oriented backward. The toes pointed toward the bunkhouse, the heels pointed into the forest. It appeared as though someone had walked in reverse, away from the camp. Varga followed the prints. They continued in a straight line for approximately 200 yards before disappearing into dense undergrowth. There were no corresponding forward-facing prints, no signs of struggle or disturbance, just a single line of backward footprints leading into the trees. Varga returned to the bunkhouse and woke the other men. He showed them the prints. No one had an explanation. One of the workers suggested it might be a prank, though no one admitted to it. The camp foreman, a man named Raymond Kostler, documented the incident in his daily log. He noted the date, the weather conditions, and Varga's account. He did not report it to the timber company. In March of 1972, a similar incident occurred at a different camp 17 miles north of Forks. A logger named Dennis Hargrove discovered backward boot prints leading from his bunk into the forest. The prints matched his boots. His boots were muddy. He had no memory of leaving the bunkhouse during the night. Hargrove's camp was operated by a different contractor. The men did not know each other. Hargrove mentioned the incident to his foreman, a man named Michael O'Reilly. O'Reilly told him not to worry about it. He suggested Hargrove might have been sleepwalking. Hargrove said he had never sleepwalked before. Over the next 18 months, 5 more incidents were reported. All followed the same pattern. A logger would wake to find backward boot prints leading from the camp into the forest. The prints always matched the logger's own boots. The boots were always muddy. None of the men had any memory of leaving their bunks. The incidents occurred at different camps, operated by different contractors, spread across the Forks logging district. The men did not know each other. There was no common employer, no shared crew, no obvious connection. In July of 1973, a logger named Victor Salazar reported the phenomenon to a Clallam County deputy sheriff named Frank Nguyen. Salazar had woken to find his own backward prints leading into the forest. He followed them for over a mile before they disappeared near a creek. Salazar said he was frightened. He did not want to return to the camp. Nguyen visited the camp and interviewed the crew. Several men confirmed that they had heard about similar incidents at other camps. One man, a faller named Gerald Pritchard, said it had happened to him twice. The first time in April of 1972, the second time in June of 1973. Both times the prints led into the forest and disappeared. Both times he had no memory of leaving his bunk. Nguyen asked if anyone had stayed awake to watch for unusual activity. No one had. He asked if the men had checked for signs of intruders or animals. They had found nothing. Nguyen suggested they set up a watch rotation. The men agreed. For 3 nights, workers at the camp took turns staying awake. Nothing unusual occurred. On the 4th night, no watch was set. The following morning, a logger named Thomas Garrett found backward prints leading from his bunk. Garrett said he had been asleep the entire night. 2 other men vouched for him. They said they had been awake and had not seen Garrett leave the bunkhouse. Nguyen filed a report with the sheriff's office. The report described the incidents as possible sleepwalking or pranks. He noted that no crimes had been committed and recommended no further action. The report was dated July 19, 1973. In August of 1973, a Forest Service ranger named Laura Padilla was conducting a routine patrol near one of the affected camps. She spoke with the camp foreman, a man named Douglas Briggs. Briggs mentioned the backward prints. Padilla asked to see the site where the most recent incident had occurred. Briggs showed her the area outside the bunkhouse. The prints had been washed away by rain, but Briggs described their location and direction. Padilla asked if anyone had considered the possibility of a medical condition. Briggs said no. Padilla suggested that the men might be experiencing a form of parasomnia, a sleep disorder that causes unusual behavior during sleep. She said she would forward the information to a colleague at the University of Washington who specialized in sleep research. In September of 1973, Dr. Raymond Takamoto, a professor of neurology at the University of Washington, received a letter from Padilla describing the incidents. Takamoto reviewed the information. He noted that sleepwalking typically involved forward movement and that the specific pattern of backward walking was highly unusual. He requested permission to visit the camps and interview the affected workers. Takamoto's request was denied. The timber contractors said they did not want outside researchers disrupting operations. Takamoto wrote a follow-up letter offering to conduct interviews off-site. He received no response. In October of 1973, the logging season ended. Most of the camps in the Forks district closed for the winter. The workers dispersed. Some returned the following spring. Others did not. Kenneth Varga, the first logger to report the phenomenon, moved to Oregon in 1974. In a 1996 interview with a regional newspaper, Varga said he still thought about the incident. "I know I didn't walk out there," he said, "but the prints were mine. The mud on my boots was fresh. I don't know how to explain it." Dennis Hargrove, the second logger to report the phenomenon, retired in 1985. He was interviewed by a local historian in 2002. Hargrove said he had tried to forget about the incident, but could not. "It wasn't scary at the time," he said. "It was just confusing. But looking back, it bothers me. Something made me walk out there, and I don't remember it." Victor Salazar, who reported the phenomenon to the sheriff's office, died in 2007. His son, Marcus Salazar, said his father had occasionally mentioned the incident. He said it felt like someone else had been using his body, Marcus recalled, like he'd been a passenger. Gerald Pritchard, who experienced the phenomenon twice, refused to discuss it in later years. In a brief phone conversation with a journalist in 2009, Pritchard said only, "It happened. I don't know why. I don't want to talk about it." In 2004, a graduate student named Sandra Kowalczyk was researching logging history in the Pacific Northwest. She came across Deputy Nguyen's report in the Clallam County Archives. Kowalczyk attempted to locate the men mentioned in the report. She found contact information for 3 of them, Varga, Hargrove, and Pritchard. She interviewed Varga and Hargrove. Pritchard declined. Kowalczyk also contacted the Forest Service to request records from Laura Padilla's patrol logs. The Forest Service said the logs from that period had been lost during an office relocation in the 1980s. Kowalczyk submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for any correspondence between Padilla and Dr. Takamoto. The request was denied. The Forest Service said the documents were not available for public review. Kowalczyk published a summary of her findings in a regional history journal in 2006. The article included interviews with Varga and Hargrove, but provided no explanation for the incidents. Kowalczyk concluded that the phenomenon remained unexplained and recommended further research. No further research was conducted. In 2012, a hiker named Jason Rivera was camping near the former site of one of the logging camps. Rivera later posted on a hiking forum that he had found unusual footprints in the mud near his tent. The prints faced backward. Rivera said he assumed they were from an animal but could not identify the species. Several users replied that backward prints were sometimes made by humans walking in reverse, though they could not explain why someone would do so. The Forks Logging District continues to operate. Most of the original camps from the 1970s have been abandoned or relocated. The timber industry has declined. Fewer workers are employed in the region. No similar incidents have been reported since 1973. Frank Nguyen, the deputy who investigated the incidents, retired in 1998. He died in 2015. His personnel file contains no mention of the backward prints beyond the original report from July 1973. Laura Padilla, the Forest Service ranger, retired in 2001. She declined to be interviewed for this account. Dr. Raymond Takamoto died in 2010. His personal papers were donated to the University of Washington Archives. Among them was a folder labeled Forks Logging District, 1973. The folder contained Padilla's original letter and Takamoto's unanswered correspondence with the timber contractors. There were no additional notes or analyses. The forest remains. The camps are gone. But on some mornings, after heavy rain, there are tracks in the mud that lead nowhere, tracks that face the wrong direction, tracks that stop where the trees begin. The shadows appeared where they should not have been. Catchess Lake sits at an elevation of 2,200 feet in the Cascade Range, approximately 60 miles east of Seattle. The lake is fed by snowmelt and mountain runoff, surrounded by steep forested slopes. The area has been logged intermittently since the early 1900s. In the 1950s, the Catchess Lake logging camp operated along the southern shore, serving as a base for crews working the surrounding timber tracts. The camp consisted of bunkhouses, a mess hall, and equipment storage. It operated seasonally from May through October. Access was limited to a narrow gravel road that became impassable during winter months. Between 1955 and 1958, the camp foreman was a man named Albert Kowalski. Kowalski kept detailed records of operations, including a modest collection of photographs documenting the camp, the workers, and the surrounding area. Kowalski used a Kodak Brownie camera, a simple box camera popular at the time. He developed the film himself using a makeshift darkroom in one of the camp buildings. Though delays were common, film often sat undeveloped for months due to supply shortages and the demands of the logging schedule. In December of 1958, after the camp had closed for the season, Kowalski developed several rolls of film that had been exposed throughout the year. Among the images were standard documentary photographs, workers operating equipment, felled trees, group portraits. But 7 of the photographs showed anomalies that Kowalski could not explain. In each of the 7 images, human figures cast multiple shadows. In one photograph, a worker standing beside a truck cast 3 distinct shadows, each pointing in a different direction. In another, a group of 5 men standing together cast a total of 14 shadows, some overlapping, others separated by several feet. The shadows were sharp and well-defined, as clear as the figures themselves. Kowalski examined the negatives. The shadows were present in the negatives. They had not been added during development. He checked his records to determine when each photograph had been taken. All 7 had been exposed between March and June of 1958. All 7 had been developed in December, 6 to 9 months after exposure. Kowalski showed the photographs to several workers who had returned for the 1959 season. One of them, a logger named Dennis Calloway, recognized himself in 2 of the images. Calloway said he remembered the days the photographs were taken. He said nothing unusual had occurred. The weather had been clear, the lighting had been normal. Another worker, a man named Victor Ramirez, suggested that the shadows might be a defect in the film or a problem with the camera. Kowalski tested the camera by taking additional photographs under similar conditions. He developed the new film immediately. The shadows were normal. Single shadows correctly oriented to the light source. A third worker, a faller named Thomas Garrett, examined the photographs closely. He pointed out that in one image, his own shadow appeared twice, once extending to his left, once to his right. He said he distinctly remembered that day. It had been late afternoon. The sun had been low in the west. His shadow should have pointed east. In the photograph, one shadow pointed east, the other pointed north. Kowalski wrote a letter to the Eastman Kodak Company, the manufacturer of the film, describing the anomaly and requesting an explanation. He included copies of 2 of the photographs. The letter was dated February 14, 1959. Kodak responded 6 weeks later. A technical representative named Harold Mitchum stated that the shadows appeared to be the result of multiple exposures or light leakage in the camera. Mitchum recommended that Kowalski inspect the camera for damage and ensure proper film handling. Kowalski inspected the camera. There was no damage. He had handled the film according to standard procedures. He wrote a second letter to Kodak, providing more details about the development timeline and emphasizing that the anomalies appeared only in film developed several months after exposure. Kodak did not respond to the second letter. In May of 1959, Kowalski showed the photographs to a photographer named Laura Ostrander, who operated a studio in Clay Elum. Ostrander examined the images under magnification. She noted that the shadows exhibited correct perspective and gradient, suggesting they were not artifacts of the development process. She said the shadows appeared to be genuine, cast by a light source, but could offer no explanation for their geometry or multiplicity. Ostrander suggested that Kowalski contact a professor of physics or optics. Kowalski wrote to Dr. Raymond Takamoto at the University of Washington, enclosing copies of the photographs and a detailed description of the circumstances. Dr. Takamoto responded in June. He stated that the shadows violated basic principles of light propagation. He suggested that the film might have been exposed to radiation or magnetic fields during storage, though he acknowledged this was speculative. He recommended that Kowalski preserve the negatives and consider submitting them to a scientific journal. Kowalski kept the photographs and negatives, but did not submit them for publication. He mentioned the anomaly to a few colleagues, but did not pursue further investigation. The camp continued operations through the 1950s and into the early 1960s. Kowalski retired in 1963 and moved to Yakima. In 1978, Kowalski donated his collection of logging photographs to the Kittitas County Historical Society. The collection included the 7 anomalous images. A volunteer archivist named Patricia Lundgren cataloged the collection. Lundgren noticed the unusual shadows, but assumed they were photographic errors or novelty images. She filed them with the rest of the collection without special notation. In 1994, a graduate student named Sandra Kowalczyk was researching logging history in the Cascades. She reviewed Kowalski's collection at the Historical Society. She noticed the anomalous shadows and asked Lundgren about them. Lundgren said she had no information beyond what was in the archive. Kowalczyk made copies of the photographs and showed them to her advisor, Dr. Michael Driscoll, a professor of history at Central Washington University. Driscoll examined the images. He noted the clear, well-defined quality of the shadows and the fact that they appeared in multiple photographs from different dates. He suggested that Kowalczyk contact a specialist in photographic analysis. Kowalczyk reached out to Dr. Evelyn Vasquez, a forensic imaging expert at the University of Washington. Dr. Vasquez analyzed digital scans of the original negatives. She confirmed that the shadows were present in the negatives and had not been added during printing or scanning. She conducted spectral analysis of the images. The shadows exhibited normal density gradients consistent with genuine shadows cast by physical objects. Vasquez concluded that the shadows were photographically genuine but could not explain their geometry. Vasquez recommended that the negatives be examined for signs of tampering or chemical alteration. The negatives were sent to a materials laboratory in Seattle. Analysis showed no evidence of manipulation. The film stock was consistent with Kodak products from the 1950s. The emulsion showed normal aging patterns. In 1996, Kowalczyk published a paper in a regional history journal describing the anomalous photographs. The paper included reproductions of 3 of the images and a summary of the investigative findings. The paper attracted modest attention. Several photographers and imaging specialists contacted Kowalczyk to offer theories. Most suggested optical or chemical explanations, though none could account for all the observed characteristics. One photographer, a man named Gerald Pritchard, proposed that the shadows might have been caused by reflections from water or ice during exposure. Kowalczyk reviewed Kowalski's notes. None of the photographs had been taken near water or ice. The ground had been dry, the weather had been clear. Another specialist, a woman named Ellen Nguyen, suggested that the film might have been exposed to X-rays during transport or storage. Kowalczyk contacted the Historical Society to inquire about the storage conditions of the negatives. The negatives had been kept in a climate-controlled vault since their donation in 1978. There was no record of X-ray exposure. In 2003, a television documentary crew contacted Kowalczyk about the photographs. The crew was producing a series on unexplained phenomena. They filmed an episode featuring the anomalous shadows and interviewed Kowalczyk, Vasquez, and Lundgren. The episode aired in 2004. It generated online discussion, but no new leads. In 2007, a physics professor named Dr. Harold Quincy reviewed the photographs as part of a personal research project on optical anomalies. Quincy noted that the shadows' angles did not correspond to any single light source position. He calculated that the shadows would require at least 3 distinct light sources positioned at impossible locations, including below ground level. Quincy concluded that the phenomenon could not be explained by conventional optics. Quincy contacted several colleagues in the fields of optics and atmospheric science. None could offer a satisfactory explanation. One scientist, Miriam Alvarez, suggested that the anomalies might be related to a localized atmospheric phenomenon occurring at the time of exposure, though she could not specify what such a phenomenon would entail. Albert Kowalski died in 2009. His daughter, Carol Kowalski Reinhardt, donated additional materials from his estate to the Historical Society, including correspondence related to the photographs. Among the letters was an undated note in Kowalski's handwriting. The note read, "Shadows wrong in 7 pictures. Film sat too long before developing. Only happened with delayed film. Workers say nothing odd at time of photo. No explanation found." In 2012, an amateur researcher named Jason Rivera examined the photographs and noticed a pattern. All 7 anomalous images had been developed between 6 and 9 months after exposure. Rivera reviewed Kowalski's full collection. Images developed within 3 months of exposure showed normal shadows. Images developed after 9 months also showed normal shadows. Only images developed within a specific window exhibited the anomaly. Rivera proposed that some property of the film emulsion changed during storage, making it sensitive to light or radiation that was present at the time of exposure, but not visible or detected by conventional means. He could not explain what this radiation might be or why it would affect only certain photographs. Rivera's theory was discussed on online forums but gained no traction in academic circles. No experiments were conducted to test the hypothesis. The 7 photographs remain in the Catitas County Historical Society archives. They are available for viewing by appointment. The negatives are stored separately in archival sleeves. The shadows are still visible. They have not faded or changed. In 2018, a hiker photographed the former site of the Caches Lake logging camp. The camp structures are gone. The area has been reforested. The hiker later reviewed the digital images and noticed that one photograph showed multiple shadows cast by a tree stump. The shadows pointed in different directions. The hiker posted the image online. Several users suggested it was a result of lens flare or digital artifact. The original file metadata showed no signs of manipulation. The hiker has not returned to the site. The radio answered questions that had not yet been spoken. Lake Wenatchee sits at the confluence of the White River and Little Wenatchee River in the eastern Cascade Range, approximately 80 miles northeast of Seattle. The lake is surrounded by national forest land, dense with lodgepole pine and subalpine fir. The area has served as a logging district since the early 1900s. In the 1970s, the Forest Service maintained several ranger stations and supervisor cabins throughout the region to monitor timber operations and fire risk. Most of these structures were abandoned by the early 1980s as operations consolidated at larger facilities closer to maintained roads. One such cabin, designated Station 7, sat 3 miles northwest of the lake on a narrow ridge accessible only by foot trail. The cabin was a simple one-room structure built in 1953, measuring 12 feet by 16 feet. It contained a desk, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs, and a wood stove. Communication equipment had been installed in 1967, a Motorola two-way radio mounted on the wall above the desk. The radio operated on Forest Service frequencies and was powered by a generator kept outside the cabin. The station was officially decommissioned in 1979. The generator was removed. The radio was left in place. In August of 1981, a Forest Service technician named Roger Yamamoto was conducting a survey of abandoned stations to assess salvage value. Yamamoto hiked to Station 7 on August 12th. He found the cabin structurally sound but neglected. The door was unlocked. The interior smelled of mildew and rodent activity. The radio was still mounted on the wall. Yamamoto noted its condition in his report and prepared to leave. As he stood in the doorway, the radio emitted a burst of static. Yamamoto turned. The static resolved into a voice. The voice was male, calm, and distinct. It said, 15 minutes, east window. Yamamoto approached the radio. There was no power indicator, no lights. The cable that had once connected it to the generator lay coiled on the floor, its end frayed and corroded. Yamamoto checked the back of the unit. There were no batteries. He examined the wall mounting. There was no hidden power source. He waited. After approximately 14 minutes, a branch fell against the east window, striking the glass but not breaking it. Yamamoto checked his watch. 15 minutes had passed since the radio spoke. Yamamoto left the cabin and returned to the ranger station at Lake Wenatchee. He reported the incident to his supervisor, a man named Leonard Briggs. Briggs asked if Yamamoto had been alone. Yamamoto said yes. Briggs asked if the radio had been connected to anything. Yamamoto said no. Briggs told him to file a written report, but not to discuss the incident with other staff. Yamamoto submitted his report on August 13th. Briggs read it and filed it without comment. 3 days later, Briggs hiked to Station 7 himself. He brought a voltmeter and a portable radio. When he entered the cabin, the mounted radio was silent. Briggs tested it with the voltmeter. No electrical activity. He spoke aloud. "Is anyone there?" The radio remained silent. Briggs waited 30 minutes. Nothing happened. He left. 2 weeks later, on August 29th, a seasonal ranger named Ellen Vasquez was assigned to inspect Station 7 as part of a routine maintenance check. Vasquez had not been told about Yamamoto's report. She arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. As she entered, the radio emitted static. A voice said, "You will need the first aid kit." Vasquez froze. She approached the radio. It was silent again. She checked the back of the unit. No power source. She examined the cabin. There was a first aid kit in the filing cabinet. She opened it. The contents appeared intact. Vasquez continued her inspection. As she stepped outside to check the roof, she slipped on wet moss and fell, cutting her hand on a sharp rock. The cut was deep. She returned to the cabin and used the first aid kit to bandage the wound. Vasquez reported the incident to Briggs when she returned to the ranger station. Briggs asked her to describe exactly what the voice had said. Vasquez repeated it. Briggs asked if she had been thinking about the first aid kit before the radio spoke. Vasquez said no, she had not known there was a first aid kit in the cabin. Briggs contacted the Forest Service Regional Office in Wenatchee. He spoke with a communications specialist named Dr. Harold Quincy. Quincy asked if the radio could be receiving transmissions from an external source. Briggs said the radio had no power and was not connected to any antenna or network. Quincy said he would review the technical specifications of the equipment. On September 4th, Quincy visited Station 7 with Briggs and Yamamoto. They brought recording equipment and additional testing instruments. When they entered the cabin, the radio was silent. Quincy examined the unit. It was a standard Motorola model from the 1960s, designed for VHF communication. The internal components showed corrosion consistent with years of disuse. Quincy disconnected the radio from the wall and opened the casing. There were no hidden batteries or capacitors capable of storing charge. Quincy placed the radio on the desk and set up a tape recorder. He said aloud, "If there is anyone transmitting, please identify yourself." The radio remained silent for 3 minutes. Then it emitted static. A voice said, "You will leave before dark." Quincy checked his watch. It was 3:47 in the afternoon. Sunset was at 7:18. He asked, "Why should we leave?" The radio did not respond. Quincy and the others waited. At 6:30, a storm rolled in from the west. The temperature dropped. Rain began to fall heavily. The trail back to the ranger station became treacherous. Briggs suggested they leave immediately to avoid hiking in the dark. They packed their equipment and departed at 6:52. The tape recorder had captured the radio's transmission. Quincy analyzed the recording at the ranger station. The voice was clear and unmodulated. There was no background noise typical of radio transmissions. The frequency could not be determined because the radio had no power. Quincy wrote a report dated September 7th. The report stated that the radio appeared to be non-functional and that the voices could not be explained by conventional radio technology. He recommended that the equipment be removed and sent to a laboratory for further analysis. The regional office approved the recommendation. On September 15th, Yamamoto and Vasquez returned to Station 7 to retrieve the radio. When they entered the cabin, the radio was gone. The wall mounting remained, but the unit itself had been removed. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had been locked when they arrived using the same Forest Service key. Briggs contacted the regional office. No one had authorized the removal of the radio. A search was conducted. No Forest Service personnel reported taking the equipment. The incident was logged as theft. No further investigation was conducted. In October of 1981, a hiker named Thomas Garrett reported finding a radio near Station 7. Garrett said he had been hiking off-trail and discovered the radio sitting on a flat rock approximately half a mile from the cabin. The radio appeared to be in working condition. Garrett brought it to the ranger station. Yamamoto identified it as the radio from Station 7. Briggs contacted Quincy. Quincy returned to examine the radio. It was the same unit. The corrosion patterns matched photographs from his previous inspection. Quincy asked Garrett to describe exactly where he had found it. Garrett provided coordinates. Briggs and Quincy hiked to the location. There was a flat rock. There were no footprints or tire tracks nearby. Quincy took the radio to a laboratory in Seattle. Technicians disassembled it. The components showed no signs of recent use. The circuits were corroded. The speaker was intact but non-functional without power. The technicians could find no mechanism that would allow the radio to produce sound. Quincy wrote a second report dated November 3rd. The report concluded that the radio could not have transmitted the messages described by witnesses. He suggested that the voices might have been auditory hallucinations or misidentified natural sounds. He acknowledged that this explanation did not account for the predictive content of the messages. The radio was returned to Forest Service storage in Wenatchee. It was cataloged as surplus equipment. In 1987, the storage facility was relocated. The radio was listed as missing during the inventory process. It has not been recovered. Roger Yamamoto retired from the Forest Service in 2004. In a 2009 interview, Yamamoto said he remained certain of what he had heard. "The radio spoke," he said. "It told me something that happened 15 minutes later. I don't know how, I don't know why. But it happened." Ellen Vasquez left the Forest Service in 1985. She declined to be interviewed about the incident. In a brief written statement, she said, "I heard a voice. I used the first aid kit. That is all I can confirm." Dr. Harold Quincy died in 2012. His personal files were donated to the University of Washington Archives. Among them was a folder labeled Station 7 Incident. The folder contained his reports, photographs of the radio, and a handwritten note. The note read, "No rational explanation. Voice preceded event. Recommend no further investigation." Leonard Briggs retired in 1996. He was interviewed by a local historian in 2007. Briggs said he believed the witnesses were credible, but that he had no explanation for what they experienced. "I've worked in these mountains for 30 years, he said. "I've seen things I can't explain." This was one of them. Station 7 was demolished in 1992. The site was cleared and reforested. The trail leading to the cabin has been closed. The area is no longer marked on Forest Service maps. In 2015, a backpacker reported hearing a voice while camping near the former location of Station 7. The backpacker said the voice was calm and clear. It said, "Do not stay here." The backpacker left immediately and reported the incident to a ranger. The ranger found no evidence of other people in the area. The report was filed as a routine log entry. No investigation was conducted. They came back from the forest 20 years older. Darrington sits in the Sauk River Valley, 40 miles east of Everett, Washington, surrounded by the steep ridges of the North Cascades. The town has existed as a logging community since the late 1800s. The valley is narrow, hemmed in by mountains on all sides. Dense forests of Douglas fir and western red cedar cover the slopes. The region receives over 80 inches of rain annually. Fog settles in the valley and lingers for days. Roads are few. Much of the surrounding wilderness remains unmapped. In the 1960s, Darrington supported several independent logging operations. The work was seasonal, dangerous, and poorly documented. Crews were often hired on a temporary basis. Safety inspections were infrequent. Medical records were minimal. Most camps operated without oversight from state or federal agencies. In late September of 1966, a logging crew of 12 men was working a tract 6 miles northwest of Darrington. The tract was owned by Cascade Timber Corporation and covered approximately 150 acres of old-growth forest. The crew had been clearing the area for 3 weeks. They worked Monday through Saturday and returned to town on weekends. The foreman was a man named Albert Kowalski. The crew consisted of fallers, buckers, and equipment operators, most of them local men from Darrington and nearby towns. On Friday, September 23rd, the crew left the worksite at 5 in the evening as usual. They returned to Darrington. Most went home. Some gathered at a local tavern. By Saturday evening, all 12 men were accounted for in town. Nothing unusual was reported. On Monday morning, September 26th, the crew returned to the worksite. Kowalski arrived at the camp office at 7:30. The men began arriving shortly after. Kowalski noticed immediately that something was wrong. The men looked older, not subtly, not gradually, dramatically. Their faces were lined and weathered. Several had gray streaks in their hair that had not been there on Friday. One man, a faller named Dennis Calloway, who was 28 years old, had hair that was almost entirely white. Another, a bucker named Victor Ramirez, walked with a pronounced limp that Kowalski had never seen before. Kowalski asked Calloway what had happened. Calloway said nothing had happened. He said he felt fine. Kowalski pointed out the gray hair. Calloway touched his head, as if noticing it for the first time. He said he didn't know. Kowalski gathered the crew. He asked if anyone felt ill or injured. No one responded. He asked if anyone had been in an accident over the weekend. They all said no. Kowalski told them to take the day off and return on Tuesday. Most of the men left without argument. Two of the men, Calloway and Ramirez, stayed behind. Kowalski asked them again what had happened. Calloway said they had worked the north sector on Friday. He said they had finished late, around 6:30, because they wanted to clear a specific area before the weekend. Ramirez confirmed this. Kowalski checked the work logs. The north sector had been scheduled for clearing, but the crew had been instructed to stop work at 5. Calloway said they had stayed longer. Kowalski asked what they had seen. Calloway said nothing. Ramirez said the same. Kowalski did not press further. He told them to go home. On Tuesday, September 27th, 8 of the 12 men returned to work. 4 did not. Kowalski called their homes. One man, a logger named Thomas Garrett, answered. He said he was quitting. He would not return to the site. Kowalski asked why. Garrett hung up. The 8 men who returned appeared unchanged from Monday. They worked the south and east sectors. None of them would go near the north sector. Kowalski asked why. No one answered. On Wednesday, September 28th, Kowalski contacted Cascade Timber's regional office in Everett. He spoke with the operations manager, a man named Douglas Fenton. Kowalski described what he had observed. Fenton asked if the men were able to work. Kowalski said yes, but they refused to work the north sector. Fenton told him to reassign them to other areas and continue operations. Kowalski followed the instruction. Over the next 2 weeks, the crew cleared the south and east sectors. The north sector remained untouched. On October 12th, Fenton visited the site. He walked the north sector with Kowalski. The area was dense forest, no different from the rest of the tract. Fenton asked if Kowalski had noticed anything unusual. Kowalski said no. Fenton told him to complete the north sector using a different crew. A new crew of 10 men was brought in from Sultan. They cleared the north sector over the course of 2 weeks. No incidents were reported. In November of 1966, a physician named Dr. Evelyn Vasquez was conducting routine health screenings for logging companies in Snohomish County. She examined workers from several operations, including men from the Darrington camp. Among those examined were 5 of the 12 men from the original crew. Dr. Vasquez noted unusual findings. The men showed signs of advanced aging inconsistent with their stated ages. Dennis Calloway, who was 28, had joint degeneration typical of someone in their 50s. Victor Ramirez, who was 32, had arterial calcification and skin elasticity loss consistent with a man in his 60s. Another man, Gerald Pritchard, who was 25, had cataracts forming in both eyes. Dr. Vasquez questioned each man about their medical history. All 5 reported no significant health issues prior to late September. All 5 had worked the Darrington camp. All 5 had been part of the crew that worked the north sector on September 23rd. Dr. Vasquez wrote a summary of her findings and submitted it to the Snohomish County Health Department on November 18th. The report noted the clustering of accelerated aging symptoms among workers from a single site. She recommended further investigation. The Health Department forwarded the report to the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. An inspector named Harold Quincy was assigned to investigate. Quincy visited the Darrington camp in December. He interviewed Kowalski and reviewed work logs. He inspected the north sector. He found no obvious hazards, no chemical exposure, no radiation sources. The trees had been cleared. The ground was undisturbed. Quincy interviewed 3 of the affected workers. All three confirmed they had worked the north sector on September 23rd. All three said they had noticed the aging symptoms over the weekend. None of them could explain it. When asked what they had seen or experienced in the north sector, all three said they had seen nothing unusual. Quincy wrote a report dated December 22, 1966. The report stated that no occupational hazards had been identified at the site. He noted that the workers' symptoms were unexplained but did not appear to be related to workplace conditions. He recommended that the affected workers seek medical evaluation but did not recommend further investigation of the site. The report was filed. No additional action was taken. In January of 1967, a journalist named Laura Ostrander was writing a feature story on logging safety for a regional newspaper. She heard about the Darrington incident from a source in the health department. She contacted Dr. Vasquez. Vasquez confirmed the medical findings but declined to speculate about causes. Ostrander contacted several of the affected workers. None agreed to be interviewed. Ostrander visited Darrington and spoke with locals. A tavern owner named Raymond Briggs said some of the workers had stopped coming into town. "They keep to themselves now," Briggs said. "They don't talk about what happened. You ask them, they walk away." Ostrander attempted to visit the logging site. Access was restricted. She contacted Cascade Timber for permission. The company declined. Ostrander's editor decided not to pursue the story further. The article was never published. In 1972, a university researcher named Dr. Michael Takamoto was studying occupational health patterns in Pacific Northwest logging operations. He came across Dr. Vasquez's 1966 report in County Health Archives. Takamoto contacted Vasquez. She provided him with copies of the medical records with names redacted. Takamoto reviewed the records. The pattern of symptoms was consistent across all 5 workers: premature graying, joint degeneration, vascular calcification, skin changes. Takamoto noted that these symptoms typically develop over decades, not days. He wrote a letter to the Department of Labor and Industries requesting access to the site inspection report. The request was denied. The department stated that the records were part of a closed case file and were not available for research purposes. Takamoto attempted to locate the affected workers. He found addresses for 3 of them. 1 had moved out of state. 1 had died in 1970. The third, Dennis Calloway, agreed to a brief phone conversation. Calloway said he did not want to discuss the incident. When Takamoto asked what he had seen in the north sector, Calloway said, "We stayed too long." He would not elaborate. Takamoto published a paper in 1974 in a regional occupational health journal. The paper described an unusual cluster of accelerated aging symptoms among logging workers, but did not identify the location or the company. The paper received little attention. Albert Kowalski retired in 1976. He died in 1989. His son, Marcus Kowalski, said his father rarely spoke about his time as a foreman. He mentioned once that there was something wrong with part of the forest, Marcus said. He wouldn't say what. He just said the men shouldn't have stayed. Dennis Calloway died in 1998 at the age of 60. His obituary listed his age as 60, but medical records indicated he had the physiological age of someone in their 80s. Victor Ramirez died in 2001 at 57. His death certificate listed multiple age-related conditions. Of the 12 men who worked the North Sector on September 23, 1966, 7 are deceased. The remaining 5 have declined all interview requests. None have returned to logging. None have spoken publicly about the incident. The tract northwest of Darrington was logged completely by 1968. The land is now part of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The North Sector is not marked on any maps. There are no trails, no historical markers. The Forest Service has no record of the area being closed or restricted. In 2015, a hiker reported finding a cluster of trees in the area that appeared to be dead but still standing. The trees showed no signs of disease or fire damage. The Forest Service investigated. The trees were found to be aged far beyond their expected lifespan based on size and growth rings. No explanation was determined. The area was not flagged for further study. The medical records of the 12 workers remain in the Snohomish County Health Department archives. They are available for review by qualified researchers. No one has requested access since 1974. The tools came back, but they came back wrong. The Skykomish Valley runs east from the town of Gold Bar, Washington, following the Skykomish River through increasingly steep terrain as it approaches Stevens Pass. The valley has been logged since the 1890s. The forests are dense with western hemlock and Douglas fir. Rainfall exceeds 90 inches annually. The ground is perpetually damp. Metal corrodes quickly. Wood rots within years if left exposed. Between 1950 and 1960, logging operations in the valley were conducted by small independent contractors working under temporary permits. Equipment was basic: axes, crosscut saws, chains, wedges. Tools were expensive. Their loss was documented carefully in company records. Theft was common. So was carelessness. A misplaced axe could mean a day's wages deducted from a worker's pay. Records from the Skykomish Timber Cooperative, a consortium of small operators, list 47 tools reported lost or stolen between 1950 and 1960. Most were axes, some were saws, a few were logging chains. The records include dates, locations, and descriptions. The tools were never recovered during active operations. In June of 1987, a Forest Service surveyor named Roger Yamamoto was conducting a boundary assessment near Index, a small community in the upper Skykomish Valley. Yamamoto was walking an old logging road, now overgrown, when he noticed something unusual. Lying in a clearing approximately 50 yards from the road were 3 axes. They were arranged in a triangle, each blade pointing inward toward the center. The axes were clean. No rust, no moss. The wooden handles were intact, the grain still visible. Yamamoto photographed the axes and recorded their GPS coordinates. He reported the finding to his supervisor, a ranger named Leonard Briggs. Briggs visited the site 2 days later. The axes were still there, unchanged. Briggs examined them. The metal was smooth. The edges were sharp. He checked the area for signs of recent activity. There were no footprints, no tire tracks. No disturbance of the undergrowth around the axes. Briggs took one of the axes back to the ranger station. He showed it to a blacksmith in Gold Bar, a man named Dennis Hargrove. Hargrove examined the axe. He said it was old, probably from the 1950s based on the style of the head and the type of steel. He said the axe should have rusted significantly if it had been outside for more than a few years. It had not. In August of 1987, Yamamoto was surveying another section of the valley, this time near the town of Skykomish. He found 2 cross-cut saws lying parallel to each other on a flat section of ground near an abandoned logging camp. The saws were approximately 6 feet long each. They were positioned exactly 12 feet apart. They showed no rust. The teeth were sharp. The handles were undamaged. Yamamoto reported the finding to Briggs. Briggs visited the site. He measured the distance between the saws. 12 feet, as Yamamoto had said. Briggs checked historical records. The camp had been active in the 1950s. Company logs listed 2 cross-cut saws as lost in 1953. The descriptions matched the saws Yamamoto had found. In October of 1987, a logger named Victor Salazar was hiking near Troublesome Creek, a tributary of the Skycomish River. Salazar was familiar with the area. He had worked in the valley in the 1960s. He found a logging chain coiled in a perfect circle on a moss-covered rock. The chain was approximately 30 feet long. It was clean, no rust, no corrosion. The links were intact. Salazar brought the chain to the ranger station. Briggs examined it. He checked the records. A logging chain matching the description had been reported lost in 1956 near Troublesome Creek. The chain had belonged to a crew working for Stevens Pass Timber Company. Briggs contacted the company. Stevens Pass Timber had dissolved in 1972. Records had been transferred to the Washington State Archives. Briggs requested copies. The archive sent documentation of the lost chain. The description matched. Over the next 15 years, similar findings were reported throughout the Skycomish Valley. In 1992, a hiker found 4 axes arranged in a square near Deception Falls. In 1998, a Forest Service crew discovered 6 wedges placed in a straight line on a ridge above the North Fork Skycomish River. In 2003, a photographer found 2 saws and an axe arranged in an equilateral triangle near the town of Bering. All of the tools were old. All matched descriptions of equipment lost or stolen decades earlier. None showed signs of weathering. All were arranged in geometric patterns. In 2004, Briggs, who had been promoted to district ranger, compiled a report. The report documented 19 separate findings of tools between 1987 and 2003. Briggs noted the consistent lack of corrosion, the geometric arrangements, and the correspondence with historical loss records. He submitted the report to the Pacific Northwest Research Station, a branch of the U.S. Forest Service dedicated to environmental and resource studies. A materials scientist named Dr. Evelyn Kowalski reviewed the report. Dr. Kowalski requested samples of the tools. Briggs provided 3 axes, 1 saw, and 1 chain. Dr. Kowalski's team conducted metallurgical analysis. The steel composition was consistent with tools manufactured in the 1940s and 50s. The surfaces showed no oxidation. The microscopic structure of the metal showed no signs of long-term exposure to moisture. Dr. Kowalski wrote a preliminary report dated March 15, 2005. She stated that the absence of corrosion was inconsistent with environmental exposure in the Skycomish Valley. She suggested that the tools might have been stored in a controlled environment and recently placed at the discovery sites. She could not explain why someone would do this or how they would have access to tools matching historical records. Briggs responded that the discovery sites were remote. Many were inaccessible by vehicle. Some were miles from the nearest trail. He argued that deliberate placement would require significant effort and provided no obvious motive. Dr. Kowalski acknowledged these points, but maintained that natural preservation of the tools was scientifically implausible. Her final report, dated June 8, 2005, concluded that the tools had been artificially preserved through unknown means. The report was filed. No further investigation was recommended. In 2007, a journalist named Sandra Kowalczyk wrote an article about the phenomenon for a regional magazine. Kowalczyk interviewed Briggs, Yamamoto, and several other individuals who had found tools. She visited multiple discovery sites and photographed the locations. The article was published in September 2007. The article attracted attention from amateur researchers and metal detectorists. Several groups visited the Skycomish Valley hoping to find additional tools. A few reported finding rusted or damaged equipment, but nothing matching the pattern described by Briggs. One researcher, a retired engineer named Harold Quincy, proposed a theory. Quincy suggested that the tools might have been buried shortly after they were lost, protected from oxidation by specific soil conditions, and later unearthed by natural erosion or animal activity. He acknowledged that this did not explain the geometric arrangements. Another researcher, a geologist named Dr. Miriam Alvarez, visited several discovery sites in 2009. Dr. Alvarez analyzed soil samples. She found no evidence of recent disturbance or unusual mineral content that would inhibit corrosion. She concluded that Quincy's theory was unlikely. In 2012, a forestry student named Laura Padilla conducted a thesis project on the Skycomish tools. Padilla reviewed all available documentation and visited 15 discovery sites. She noted that the tools were always found in areas that had been logged between 1950 and 1960. She also noted that the geometric patterns became more complex over time. Early findings showed simple arrangements, triangles, lines. Later findings showed more elaborate patterns, hexagons, concentric circles. Padilla proposed that the arrangements might be deliberate, created by an individual or group with knowledge of the historical logging sites. She could not explain how the tools had been preserved or why someone would engage in such activity. Her thesis was completed in May 2013. It received limited circulation. Leonard Briggs retired in 2015. In a 2018 interview, Briggs said he remained convinced that the tools were genuine artifacts from the 1950s. "I've worked in these forests for 40 years," he said. "I know what exposure does to metal. These tools should have rusted to nothing. They didn't. Someone or something preserved them. I don't know how. I don't know why." Roger Yamamoto, who discovered the first tools in 1987, declined to be interviewed. In a written statement, he said, "I found what I found. I reported it. I have no explanation." Victor Salazar, who found the chain at Troublesome Creek, died in 2016. His daughter, Maria Salazar, said her father believed the tools were significant. He said it wasn't natural, she recalled. He said the forest was giving something back, but he didn't know what it meant. The most recent discovery was reported in 2019. A backpacker found an axe and 2 wedges arranged in a right angle near Beckler River, a tributary of the Skycomish. The tools matched descriptions of equipment lost in 1958. They showed no corrosion. The backpacker reported the finding to the Forest Service. A ranger visited the site and photographed the tools. They were left in place. No new discoveries have been reported since then. The tools documented between 1987 and 2019 remain in Forest Service storage or have been returned to discovery sites. Some are displayed at the Skycomish Historical Museum in Gold Bar. The patterns persist. Triangles, lines, circles. Each arrangement precise, each tool impossibly preserved. The forest holds them like evidence of something unfinished, something that refuses to decay. The work was impossible, but the wood was real. The Green River flows west from the Cascade Range through King County, Washington, eventually emptying into Puget Sound south of Seattle. In the 1940s, the upper Green River Valley was dense with old-growth timber. Logging camps dotted the ridges and river flats. The terrain was difficult. Roads were poor. Communication was limited to occasional radio contact and weekly supply runs. Most camps operated independently, with minimal oversight from the timber companies that held the contracts. In the summer of 1947, a camp known as Green River Station 4 operated approximately 18 miles upstream from the town of Palmer. The camp housed 23 men and served as a base for several small crews working different sections of the valley. The camp foreman was a man named Raymond Kowalski. Kowalski maintained daily work logs documenting crew assignments, hours worked, and timber output. These logs were submitted monthly to Cascade Timber Corporation, the company managing operations in the area. On August 14, 1947, Kowalski assigned a crew of 8 men to clear a section of forest on the eastern slope above the river. The crew included fallers, buckers, and loaders. The section to be cleared was approximately 12 acres of Douglas fir and western hemlock. The crew was instructed to begin work at 6 in the morning and return to camp by 5 in the evening, a standard 11-hour shift. The crew left camp as scheduled. Kowalski remained at the camp office, processing paperwork and coordinating supply deliveries. At 1 in the afternoon, the crew radioed in to report progress. They said they were on schedule. Kowalski logged the communication. The crew returned to camp at 1 in the morning on August 15th. They had been gone for 19 hours. Kowalski was asleep when they arrived. One of the crew members, a faller named Dennis Calloway, woke him. Calloway said the crew had finished the job. Kowalski asked why they had worked so late. Calloway said they wanted to complete the section before returning. Kowalski reprimanded the crew for exceeding safe working hours. He told them to rest and report for the next shift as usual. The men went to their bunks. The following morning, Kowalski hiked to the work site to inspect the section. He brought a measuring tape and a notebook. When he arrived, he found that the entire 12-acre section had been cleared. The trees had been felled, limbed, bucked into logs, and transported to a staging area near the access road. The logs were stacked neatly, ready for loading onto trucks. Kowalski counted the logs. There were 218. He measured several of them. The average length was 16 feet. The average diameter was 30 inches. He calculated the total board footage. The crew had processed approximately 140,000 board feet of timber. Kowalski returned to camp and reviewed. His notes: a crew of 8 men working an 11-hour shift could typically process 20 to 25,000 board feet, assuming optimal conditions and no equipment failures. Even working 19 hours, the output should not have exceeded 40,000 board feet. Kowalski called a meeting with the crew. He asked them to explain the output. Calloway said they had worked steadily. Another crew member, a bucker named Victor Ramirez, confirmed this. Kowalski asked if they had used additional equipment. The men said no. They had used the standard tools: axes, cross-cut saws, chains, and a single truck for hauling. Kowalski asked if anyone else had helped them. All 8 men said no. They had worked alone. Kowalski did not pursue the matter further. He logged the shift in his daily work record. He noted the 19-hour duration and the 140,000 board feet of timber processed. He submitted the log to Cascade Timber at the end of the month. In September of 1947, a Cascade Timber supervisor named Douglas Fenton reviewed the monthly logs from Green River Station 4. He noticed the August 14th entry. He contacted Kowalski by radio and asked him to verify the figures. Kowalski confirmed them. Fenton asked if there had been any errors in measurement or calculation. Kowalski said no. Fenton visited the camp in early October. He inspected the staging area where the logs had been stacked. The logs were still there, waiting for transport. Fenton counted them. 218 logs, as Kowalski had reckoned. Fenton measured several logs. The dimensions matched Kowalski's notes. Fenton interviewed the crew. All 8 men confirmed they had worked the shift. All 8 said they had completed the job in 19 hours. None could explain how they had processed so much timber in that time. Fenton asked if the crew had noticed anything unusual during the shift. Calloway said the work had felt normal. Ramirez said the same. A third crew member, a loader named Thomas Garrett, said he remembered feeling tired, but not unusually so. He said the time had passed quickly. Fenton wrote a report dated October 9, 1947. The report stated that the timber output was inconsistent with the documented labor hours, but that all measurements and counts had been verified. Fenton recommended that the crew be monitored during future shifts to determine if similar output could be replicated. The report was filed with Cascade Timber's regional office in Seattle. In November of 1947, the same crew was assigned to clear another section of forest near Green River Station 4. The section was similar in size and density to the August 14th site. The crew worked an 11-hour shift. They processed 22,000 board feet of timber. The output was consistent with expectations. Over the following months, the crew worked multiple shifts. Their output remained within normal ranges. No further anomalies were recorded. In 1949, Kowalski retired from logging. He moved to Tacoma. Before leaving, he gave his personal work logs to a colleague, a foreman named Leonard Briggs. Briggs kept the logs for several years before donating them to the King County Historical Society in 1963. In 1978, a graduate student named Sandra Kowalczyk was researching logging productivity in the Pacific Northwest. She reviewed Kowalski's logs at the Historical Society. She noticed the August 14, 1947 entry. She noted the discrepancy between labor hours and output. Kowalczyk contacted several experts in forestry and industrial engineering. She asked them to review the figures. All agreed that the output was implausible. One expert, a professor named Dr. Harold Quincy, calculated that the crew would have needed to fell, limb, buck, and transport an average of one tree every 5 minutes for 19 consecutive hours to achieve the documented output. He said this was physically impossible. Kowalczyk attempted to locate members of the original crew. She found records for 6 of the 8 men. 3 were deceased. 2 could not be located. 1, Victor Ramirez, was living in Enumclaw. Kowalczyk interviewed Ramirez in December of 1978. Ramirez was 71 years old. He said he remembered the shift. He said the crew had worked hard but not exceptionally so. He said he could not explain the output. Kowalczyk asked if he remembered anything unusual about the day. Ramirez said he remembered the forest being very quiet. No birds, no wind. He said he had noticed it but had not thought much of it at the time. Kowalczyk asked if the crew had experienced any lost time or gaps in memory. Ramirez said no. He said the shift had felt long, but not abnormal. Kowalczyk published a paper in 1980 titled Anomalous Productivity in Mid-Century Logging Operations. The paper described the Green River incident and included analysis from several experts. The paper suggested that the work log might contain errors, or that the crew might have received undocumented assistance. The paper received little attention. In 1994, a journalist named Laura Ostrander wrote an article about unexplained events in Washington state logging camps. The article included a brief mention of the Green River incident. Ostrander contacted the King County Historical Society and obtained copies of Kowalski's logs. Ostrander interviewed Dr. Quincy, who had reviewed the figures for Kowalczyk's paper. Quincy said he remained convinced that the output was impossible. He said the only plausible explanations were measurement error or fraud, though he could identify no motive for fraud. Ostrander attempted to locate additional crew members. She found the family of Dennis Calloway, who had died in 1986. Calloway's son, Marcus Calloway, said his father had occasionally mentioned the shift. He said they finished faster than expected, Marcus recalled. But he never said it was strange. He just said they got the job done. Ostrander visited the site of Green River Station 4. The camp had been dismantled in the 1960s. The area had been reforested. Ostrander hiked to the approximate location of the August 14th worksite. She found no markers or remnants of logging activity. Ostrander's article was published in a regional magazine in 1995. It generated modest interest, but no new information. Raymond Kowalski died in 1983. His daughter, Carol Kowalski Reinhardt, said her father had kept copies of some of his work logs. She donated these to the Historical Society in 2001. Among them was a handwritten note dated August 15, 1947. The note read, Crew worked 19 acres output impossible by my calc. Men say nothing unusual. Timber real and measured correct. No explanation. In 2009, a forestry researcher named Dr. Evelyn Vasquez reviewed the Green River incident as part of a study on historical logging practices. Vasquez analyzed the work log entries and consulted with experts in labor productivity and timber processing. She concluded that the documented output could not have been achieved by 8 men in 19 hours using the equipment available in 1947. Vasquez proposed that the work log might reflect a clerical error, perhaps recording the output of multiple shifts as a single entry. She noted, however, that Kowalski's logs from other dates showed consistent attention to detail and accuracy. She could find no evidence of similar errors elsewhere in his records. Vasquez's findings were published in a forestry journal in 2011. The article concluded that the Green River incident remained unexplained. Victor Ramirez died in 2013. No other members of the original crew are known to be alive. The logs are still housed at the King County Historical Society. They are available for review by researchers. The August 14, 1947 entry remains unchanged, 19 hours, 8 men, 140,000 board feet. The numbers do not add up. They never have. But the wood was real. The forest remembered what they had forgotten. Mount Baker rises to 10,781 feet in the North Cascades, approximately 30 miles east of Bellingham, Washington. The mountain is an active volcano, though its last major eruption occurred in the mid-1800s. The slopes are heavily forested below the timber line, dense with western hemlock, Douglas fir, and western red cedar. Logging operations in the area began in the early 1900s and continued through the 1980s. The terrain is difficult. Fog is common. The forest floor is thick with moss and undergrowth. Visibility is often limited to a few dozen feet. In the spring of 1972, a logging crew was working a tract on the southwest slope of Mount Baker, approximately 12 miles from the town of Glacier. The tract was owned by North Cascade Timber Company and covered roughly 80 acres. The crew consisted of 14 men working under a foreman named Albert Kowalski. They had been clearing the area since late April. The work was proceeding normally. On the morning of May 18, 1972, 3 members of the crew arrived at a section of forest they had not yet worked. The section was approximately 2 acres, situated in a shallow depression between 2 ridges. The trees were old growth, predominantly western hemlock. The men began marking trees for felling. One of the men, a faller named Dennis Calloway, stopped working. He told the others he smelled something. The other 2 men, a bucker named Victor Ramirez and a loader named Thomas Garrett, said they smelled it too. Calloway described it as bread baking. Ramirez said it smelled like tobacco smoke. Garrett said it smelled like motor oil. The men discussed what they were smelling. None of them could identify a common source. They were in the middle of the forest. There were no buildings nearby, no roads, no campfires. The smell was distinct but not unpleasant. It faded after a few minutes. The crew worked the section over the next 3 days. Each morning, between 6 and 7, the men reported smelling things. The smells were different for each person. Calloway smelled bread every morning. Ramirez smelled tobacco. Garrett smelled motor oil. Other crew members reported other scents: vanilla, wet leather, coal smoke, lavender. On May 21st, Kowalski visited the section to inspect progress. He arrived at 6:30 in the morning. As he walked into the depression, he smelled something he had not smelled in decades. It was the scent of his grandmother's kitchen, a specific combination of cinnamon and wood polish that he associated with her house in Minnesota. His grandmother had died in 1943. Kowalski had not thought about her in years. Kowalski asked the crew if they were smelling anything. All of them said yes. He asked them to describe the smells. Each description was different, but each was specific and personal. Calloway said, "The bread smell reminded him of his mother's kitchen." Ramirez said the tobacco smell was identical to the brand his father had smoked. Garrett said the motor oil smell was from the garage where he had worked as a teenager. Kowalski documented the reports in his daily log. He noted the location of the section and the time of day when the smells occurred. He did not report the incident to North Cascade Timber. Over the following week, additional crew members worked the section. All of them reported smelling something. The smells were always personal and specific. One man smelled his late wife's perfume. Another smelled the interior of his childhood home. A third smelled the soap his grandfather had used. The smells occurred only in the 2-acre section. They occurred only in the morning, between 6 and 7. Outside the section, or at any other time of day, no one smelled anything unusual. On May 29th, Kowalski contacted a friend who worked for the University of Washington, a botanist named Dr. Harold Quincy. Kowalski described the phenomenon. Quincy said he had never heard of anything similar. He suggested that the smells might be caused by plant compounds released at specific temperatures or humidity levels. Quincy offered to visit the site. Quincy arrived on June 2nd. He brought air sampling equipment and a portable gas chromatograph. Kowalski took him to the section at 6 in the morning. As they entered the depression, Quincy stopped. He said he smelled his father's cologne. His father had died in 1968. Quincy set up his equipment. He collected air samples over a 30-minute period. He analyzed the samples. The air contained normal atmospheric gases and trace amounts of volatile, organic compounds typical of forest environments. There were no unusual chemical signatures. Quincy asked the crew members present to describe what they were smelling. Each description was different. Each was tied to a personal memory. Quincy could not identify any chemical compound that would produce such varied and individualized olfactory responses. Quincy returned to the university and wrote a report dated June 8, 1972. The report stated that the air samples showed no anomalies. He suggested that the phenomenon might be psychological, perhaps triggered by environmental cues that varied by individual. He acknowledged that this did not explain why the smells occurred only in the specific location and only at dawn. Kowalski received a copy of the report. He filed it with his personal records. He did not share it with North Cascade Timber. In mid-June, the crew completed work on the 2-acre section. The trees were felled and removed. The ground was cleared. The crew moved to a different part of the tract. No one reported unusual smells in the new location. In July of 1972, a different crew was assigned to work an adjacent tract. One of the workers, a man named Gerald Pritchard, mentioned to Kowalski that he had smelled something strange while working near the now cleared section. Pritchard said he had smelled his mother's hand lotion. His mother was still alive, but the scent was specific to a time in his childhood when she had used a particular brand. Kowalski asked Pritchard where he had been when he smelled it. Pritchard described a location at the edge of the cleared section. Kowalski checked his maps. The location was within the original 2-acre area. Kowalski visited the site. The trees were gone. The ground was bare. He stood in the clearing at dawn. He smelled nothing. In August of 1972, North Cascade Timber completed operations on the tract. The crew moved to a different location. Kowalski retired in 1974. He kept his personal logs and Quincy's report. He did not speak publicly about the incident. In 1989, a journalist named Sandra Kowalczyk was researching logging history in the North Cascades. She interviewed several retired loggers, including Kowalski. During the interview, Kowalski mentioned the smell phenomenon. Kowalczyk asked for more details. Kowalski provided copies of his logs and Quincy's report. Kowalczyk contacted several of the crew members mentioned in the logs. 3 agreed to be interviewed. Dennis Calloway, Victor Ramirez, and Thomas Garrett all confirmed the reports. Calloway said he still remembered the smell of bread. "It was exact," he said. "It wasn't just bread. It was my mother's bread, the way she made it in 1953. Ramirez said he had tried to rationalize it at the time. "I thought maybe there was a house nearby or someone camping, but there was nothing, and it was only in that one spot." Garrett said the experience had stayed with him. "I've worked forests my whole life. I've never smelled anything like that before or since. It wasn't in the air, it was in the place." Kowalczyk contacted Dr. Quincy, who was still teaching at the University of Washington. Quincy reviewed his original report and the crew's statements. He said he remained unable to explain the phenomenon. "The air samples showed nothing unusual," he said, "but the consistency of the reports is compelling. These were men who didn't know each other, describing personal memories triggered by smells that shouldn't have been there." Kowalczyk attempted to visit the site. She obtained coordinates from Kowalski's logs. The area had been reforested. Young trees covered the depression. Kowalczyk visited at dawn. She smelled nothing unusual. Kowalczyk wrote an article about the incident. It was published in a regional magazine in 1990. The article included interviews and excerpts from Quincy's report. It received modest attention but generated no new information. In 2003, a graduate student in environmental psychology named Laura Padilla read Kowalczyk's article. Padilla was studying the relationship between place and memory. She contacted Kowalczyk and Tassundet, requested access to the original logs. Kowalczyk provided them. Padilla analyzed the reports. She noted that all the smells were tied to memories from the workers' pasts, often from childhood or from deceased relatives. She noted that the memories were positive or neutral, never negative. She noted that the smells occurred only at dawn, a time associated with heightened sensitivity and liminal states. Padilla proposed that the phenomenon might be related to collective memory or place-based consciousness, though she acknowledged these were speculative frameworks. She wrote a thesis chapter on the incident, but did not publish it independently. Albert Kowalski died in 2009. His daughter, Carol Kowalski Reinhardt, donated his papers to the Whatcom County Historical Society. Among them were the logs and Quincy's report. In 2015, a backpacker reported smelling cinnamon and wood polish while hiking near Mount Baker. The backpacker mentioned it in a post on a hiking forum. The post included approximate coordinates. The coordinates were within 2 miles of the original logging site. Several users replied. One said they had smelled vanilla in the same general area. Another said they had smelled coal smoke. None of the users knew each other. None knew about the 1972 incident. The posts were later deleted. The forum no longer exists. The forest has grown back. The clearing is gone. But on certain mornings, when the light is low and the air is still, some people report smelling things that should not be there, things they remember, things they thought they had forgotten. The smells are always specific, always personal, always at dawn. The sounds came from a future that had not yet arrived. Icicle Creek flows from the Alpine Lakes wilderness in the Wenatchee National Forest, descending through steep canyons before joining the Wenatchee River near Leavenworth, Washington. The creek valley is narrow, hemmed in by granite ridges rising to over 7,000 feet. The area has been logged intermittently since the early 1900s, though much of the upper valley remains protected wilderness. The lower valley, accessible by a single-lane forest road, has seen sporadic timber operations. The terrain is difficult. Winter snows close the road from November through April. Few people live in the area year-round. In the spring of 1998, a couple named Roger and Ellen Vasquez purchased a small cabin approximately 4 miles up Icicle Creek Road. The cabin was one of 3 private residences in the valley, all isolated from each other by at least a mile. The Vasquezes planned to use it as a weekend retreat. They arrived for the first time on May 9, 1998. On the morning of May 10th, Ellen woke to the sound of chainsaws. She checked the time. It was 6:45. She woke Roger. He heard the sounds too. They were distant but clear, the rhythmic buzz of chainsaws, punctuated by the crack of falling trees. The sounds came from the west, uphill from the cabin. Roger dressed and walked outside. The sounds continued. He estimated they were coming from approximately half a mile away. He could also hear voices, faint but distinct, calling back and forth. He could not make out words, but the cadence suggested work crews coordinating. Roger returned to the cabin. He told Ellen it sounded like a logging operation. Ellen checked a map. There were no active logging sites marked in the area. The land west of their cabin was national forest. Roger suggested they drive up the road to investigate. They drove west on Icicle Creek Road. After half a mile, they reached a locked gate with a Forest Service sign indicating wilderness boundary. The sounds had stopped. They saw no equipment, no crews, no evidence of recent logging activity. The forest was quiet. Over the next 2 months, the Vasquezes visited the cabin 6 more times. On 4 of those visits, they heard the chainsaw sounds and voices. The sounds always occurred in the morning, between 6:30 and 8. They always came from the same direction. They always stopped by the time the Vasquezes drove to the gate. In July of 1998, Roger reported the sounds to the Wenatchee National Forest Ranger Station. He spoke with a ranger named Leonard Briggs. Briggs said there were no active logging permits in the Icicle Creek Valley. He said the area west of the Vasquez cabin was designated wilderness and was not open to commercial logging. Roger asked if there might be illegal logging. Briggs said he would investigate. Briggs visited the area on July 21st. He hiked beyond the gate, following old logging roads that had been decommissioned in the 1970s. He found no signs of recent activity, no fresh stumps, no equipment tracks, no evidence of tree cutting. Briggs wrote a report stating that no unauthorized logging was occurring in the area. Roger was not satisfied. He purchased a portable audio recorder. On August 8, 1998, he set up the recorder outside the cabin at 6 in the morning. He let it run for 3 hours. When he played back the recording, the chainsaw sounds were there. So were the voices. The voices were male, speaking English, though the words were difficult to distinguish. One phrase was clear: "Watch the lean on that one." Roger brought the recording to Briggs. Briggs listened to it. He confirmed that the sounds were consistent with logging operations. He could not explain their source. He suggested that sound might be traveling from a distant site, perhaps carried by atmospheric conditions or valley topography. Roger pointed out that the sounds occurred regularly, always in the same location, always at the same time. Briggs said he would consult with a Forest Service acoustic specialist. No specialist ever contacted Roger. In September of 1998, Roger shared the recording with a neighbor, a man named Thomas Garrett, who lived 2 miles down the valley. Garrett said he had heard similar sounds earlier that year, but had assumed they were from a logging operation on private land. Garrett agreed to set up his own recorder. On September 15th, he recorded similar sounds. The chainsaw noises and voices matched Roger's recordings. Roger and Garrett contacted the other cabin owner in the valley, a woman named Laura Ostrander. Ostrander said she had been away during the spring and summer, but would listen for the sounds when she returned. On October 3rd, Ostrander called Roger. She had heard the sounds that morning. She described them exactly as Roger and Garrett had. In November, the road closed for winter. The sounds stopped. No recordings were made between November and April. In May of 1999, Roger returned to the cabin. The sounds resumed. He made additional recordings. The pattern was consistent. Chainsaw noises, voices, always in the morning, always from the same direction. Roger estimated that the sounds occurred on approximately 60% of mornings when he was present. Over the next several years, Roger continued to document the phenomenon. He recorded dozens of hours of audio. He photographed the area west of the cabin, documenting that no logging was occurring. He contacted Forest Service offices multiple times. He received no explanations. In 2004, Roger retired. He and Ellen sold the cabin and moved to Spokane. Before leaving, Roger donated copies of his recordings to the Chelan County Historical Society. He included a written summary of his observations. The Historical Society filed the materials but did not publicize them. In 2007, the Forest Service approved a timber sale in the Icicle Creek Valley. The sale encompassed a 100-acre tract on the western slope above Icicle Creek Road, approximately half a mile west of where the Vasquez cabin had been located. The area had not been logged since the 1960s. Construction of a temporary logging camp began in March of 2008. The camp was located on a flat bench approximately half a mile west of the old Vasquez property. Logging operations commenced in May of 2009. In June of 2009, a forest technician named Dennis Calloway was reviewing historical records for the Icicle Creek area. Calloway was compiling documentation for environmental compliance. He came across Roger Vasquez's materials at the Chelan County Historical Society. Calloway listened to several of the recordings. Calloway compared the recordings to work logs from the 2009 logging operation. The sounds on the recordings matched the equipment and work patterns used by the current crew. Calloway noted that one of the voices on the 1998 recording said, "Watch the lean on that one," a phrase commonly used by the crew's foreman, a man named Victor Ramirez. Calloway contacted Ramirez. Ramirez reviewed the recordings. He confirmed that the phrase was one he used regularly. Calloway asked if Ramirez had worked in the Icicle Creek Valley before 2009. Ramirez said no. He had never been to the area prior to the current operation. Calloway wrote a memo dated June 18, 2009. The memo described the correspondence between the 1998 recordings and the 2009 logging activities. Calloway noted that the recordings predated the logging operation by 11 years. He recommended that the recordings be analyzed by an independent expert. The memo was filed with the Forest Service Regional Office. No analysis was conducted. In 2010, a journalist named Sandra Kowalczyk learned about the Icicle Creek recordings from a source at the Historical Society. Kowalczyk contacted Roger Vasquez. Vasquez confirmed the details and provided additional recordings. Kowalczyk contacted Dennis Calloway. Calloway confirmed the correspondence between the recordings and the logging operation, but declined to speculate on explanations. Kowalczyk contacted Victor Ramirez. Ramirez said he found the situation unsettling. "I heard the recording," he said. "That's my voice, or it sounds like my voice. But I wasn't there in 1998. I didn't even know about Icicle Creek until 2008. Kowalczyk wrote an article about the incident. It was published in a regional magazine in October of 2010. The article included excerpts from the recordings and interviews with Vasquez, Calloway, and Ramirez. The article attracted online attention, but no scientific investigation. In 2012, a physicist named Dr. Harold Quincy read Kowalczyk's article. Quincy specialized in acoustics and temporal anomalies. He contacted Kowalczyk and requested access to the original recordings. Kowalczyk provided them. Quincy analyzed the recordings. He noted that the chainsaw sounds exhibited frequency characteristics consistent with equipment used in the 2000s, not the 1990s. He noted that the voices exhibited speech patterns and terminology consistent with modern logging practices. Quincy concluded that the recordings captured sounds from the 2009 operation, but he could not explain how those sounds were audible 11 years earlier. Quincy wrote a paper titled Temporal Displacement of Acoustic Phenomena in the Icicle Creek Valley. The paper was submitted to several journals. All rejected it. Reviewers stated that the findings were implausible and suggested measurement error or fraud. Quincy did not pursue publication further. Roger Vasquez died in 2016. Ellen Vasquez confirmed in a phone interview that Roger had remained convinced of what he heard. "He knew it sounded impossible," she said, "but he recorded it. Other people heard it. It was real." The logging camp at Icicle Creek was dismantled in 2011. The area was reforested. The Forest Service has no plans for future operations in the location. In 2019, a hiker reported hearing chainsaw sounds near the old Vasquez cabin site. The hiker recorded the sounds on a smartphone. The recording was posted online. Several commenters noted that the sounds were similar to those described in Kowalczyk's article. The hiker did not respond to requests for follow-up. The recordings are still archived at the Chelan County Historical Society. They are available for review. The sounds are clear, the voices are distinct. The words match phrases used by a crew that would not arrive for 11 more years. The forest is quiet now, but on some mornings when the air is still, people report hearing chainsaws in places where no trees are being cut. Voices calling warnings. The sounds of work that has not yet begun. The same man filed the same report twice, but he had been dead for 18 years. The Salton Basin sits in the western foothills of the Cascade Range in Snohomish County, Washington, approximately 40 miles northeast of Seattle. The basin is carved by the Salton River and its tributaries, creating a network of steep valleys and ridges covered in old-growth forest. Logging in the area began in the 1890s and continued through the 1980s. The terrain is difficult. Roads are narrow and prone to washouts. Communication has always been limited. Many of the early logging camps operated in near-total isolation, accessible only by foot trail or river during certain seasons. Between 1948 and 1960, a series of small logging camps operated throughout the Salton Basin under contract to various timber companies. Record-keeping was inconsistent. Crews were often hired informally. Documentation of incidents, injuries, and personnel changes was sporadic at best. Most records that do exist are housed in county archives or historical societies, filed away in boxes that few people have reason to examine. In March of 1954, a logging foreman named Edgar Pruitt submitted an incident report to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. The report was dated March 12, 1954. It described an incident at a logging camp approximately 8 miles up the Salton River from the town of Salton. According to the report, a worker described only as "Man in Gray" had disappeared from the camp on March 11th. The man had been seen walking into the forest at dusk. He had not returned. A search had been conducted. No trace of the man was found. Pruitt's report included minimal details. No name was given for the missing man. No physical description beyond gray clothing. No indication of the man's role at the camp or how long he had been there. The report was filed and logged by the sheriff's office. A deputy was assigned to follow up. The deputy visited the camp on March 15th. He interviewed Pruitt and several crew members. None of them could provide additional information about the missing man. The deputy noted in his report that no one at the camp seemed to know the man's name or where he had come from. The case was classified as a missing person incident. No further investigation was conducted. The file was closed in April of 1954. Edgar Pruitt continued working as a logging foreman in the Salton Basin through the 1950s. In 1961, at the age of 53, Pruitt died of a heart attack. His death certificate was filed with Snohomish County on June 8, 1961. He was buried in Sultan Cemetery. In October of 1979, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office received an incident report. The report was dated March 12, 1954. It described the disappearance of a man in gray from a logging camp on the Sultan River. The report was signed by Edgar Pruitt. A clerk processing incoming reports noticed the date discrepancy. The report appeared to be 25 years old, yet it had just arrived. The clerk brought it to the attention of a sergeant named Leonard Briggs. Briggs examined the report. The paper was yellowed and brittle, consistent with documents from the 1950s. The handwriting matched samples of Pruitt's signature on file from his logging permits. The content of the report was identical to the 1954 report already in the archives. Briggs retrieved the original 1954 file. He compared the two reports side by side. They were identical. Same wording, same date, same signature. Even the coffee stain in the upper right corner of the first report appeared on the second. Briggs contacted the Postal Service to determine where the report had been mailed from. The envelope had been postmarked in Sultan on October 6, 1979. No return address was provided. Briggs interviewed postal workers in Sultan. None remembered handling the envelope. Briggs checked the archives for any other reports filed by Edgar Pruitt. There were several, all from the 1950s, all routine logging incident reports. Briggs contacted Pruitt's family. Pruitt's widow, Dorothy Pruitt, confirmed that her husband had died in 1961. She said she had kept some of his personal papers, but had donated most of his work-related documents to the Snohomish County Historical Society in the late 1960s. Briggs visited the Historical Society. A volunteer named Sandra Kowalczyk helped him search the archives. They found several boxes of logging documents donated by Dorothy Pruitt. Among them were work logs, permits, and incident reports. None of the documents were dated after 1961. Briggs contacted the sheriff's deputy who had investigated the original 1954 incident. The deputy, Thomas Garrett, was retired but still living in the area. Garrett said he remembered the case. He said the missing man had never been found. He said Pruitt had seemed uncertain about the details. He filed the report because he felt he had to, Garrett said, but he didn't seem to know much about the man. None of the crew did. Briggs asked if Garrett remembered anything unusual about the incident. Garrett said the only unusual thing was that no one at the camp could agree on when the man had arrived or what work he had been doing. Some said he'd been there a week. Others said just a day or two. No one knew his name. In November of 1979, Briggs interviewed several people who had worked in the Sultan Basin logging camps during the 1950s. One of them, a retired logger named Victor Ramirez, said he had worked at the camp where the man in gray disappeared. Ramirez said he remembered the incident. He said the man had been quiet and had kept to himself. He wore gray coveralls. Ramirez said, "That's all I remember. Gray coveralls and a gray cap. I don't think I ever heard him speak." Briggs asked Ramirez if he remembered Pruitt filing a report. Ramirez said yes. He said Pruitt had seemed troubled by the disappearance. He kept saying he had to file a report. He said it over and over, like he was worried he'd forget. Another former logger, a man named Dennis Calloway, said he had also worked at the camp. Calloway said he remembered the man in gray, but could provide no additional details. "He was just there one day and gone the next," Calloway said. "We searched for him, but it was like he'd never existed." Briggs sent both incident reports to a forensic document examiner in Seattle. The examiner, Dr. Harold Quincy, analyzed the paper, ink, and handwriting. His report, dated December 3, 1979, stated that both documents appeared to have been written by the same person using the same pen and the same type of paper. The paper stock was consistent with forms used by logging companies in the 1950s. The ink showed aging patterns consistent with documents from that era. Dr. Quincy noted that the second report, submitted in 1979, showed the same aging characteristics as the first report from 1954. He stated that it was as if both reports had been written on the same day in 1954, but had somehow remained separated until one was delivered 25 years later. Dr. Quincy concluded that the second report was not a forgery or a copy. It appeared to be an original document written by Edgar Pruitt in 1954. Briggs wrote a summary report dated December 15, 1979. He stated that the origins of the second incident report could not be determined. He noted that Edgar Pruitt had been deceased since 1961 and could not have submitted the report in 1979. He recommended that the case be filed as unexplained and closed. The report was filed. No further investigation was conducted. In 1983, a historian named Laura Ostrander was researching logging history in Snohomish County. She came across Briggs's summary report in the county archives. She contacted Briggs, who was still working for the sheriff's office. Briggs confirmed the details and provided copies of both incident reports. Ostrander interviewed Dorothy Pruitt, Edgar Pruitt's widow. Dorothy said she had no knowledge of the second report. She said her husband had never mentioned filing multiple reports about the same incident. She said that after Edgar's death, she had found boxes of his work papers in their garage. She had kept some and donated the rest. She could not recall if she had seen duplicate reports. Ostrander contacted Dr. Quincy, the document examiner. Quincy reviewed his findings and stood by his conclusions. Both reports were originals, he said. I can't explain how or why a second original would appear 25 years later, but the evidence is clear. They were both written in 1954. Ostrander wrote an article about the incident. It was published in a regional history journal in 1985. The article included photographs of both reports and excerpts from Briggs's investigation. The article attracted modest attention, but no new information. In 2006, a graduate student named Ellen Vasquez was researching unexplained incidents in Pacific Northwest logging camps. She came across Ostrander's article. Vasquez contacted the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and requested access to the original reports. The office provided copies, but stated that the original documents had been lost during a records relocation in the 1990s. Vasquez attempted to locate surviving witnesses. Victor Ramirez and Dennis Calloway were both deceased. Thomas Garrett, the deputy who had investigated the original incident, was still alive. Vasquez interviewed him by phone. Garrett, now in his 90s, said he remembered the case. I've thought about it over the years, he said. I never understood why no one knew that man's name, and I never understood how a second report could show up so long after Pruitt died. Vasquez contacted the Snohomish County Historical Society. A volunteer helped her search for additional documents related to Edgar Pruitt or the Salton Basin camps. They found work logs and payroll records from several camps in the 1950s. None of the records listed a worker matching the description of the man in gray. Vasquez wrote a thesis chapter on the incident, but did not publish it as a standalone paper. Her thesis, completed in 2008, included a section titled "The Foreman Who Filed Twice." The section concluded that the incident remained unexplained and that no plausible theory accounted for the second report's appearance. Dorothy Pruitt died in 2012. Her estate was settled by her daughter, Carol Pruitt Reinhardt. Among Dorothy's belongings was a box of Edgar's papers that had not been donated to the Historical Society. Carol went through the box. Inside were photographs, letters, and work documents. At the bottom was an envelope. Inside the envelope was a note in Edgar's handwriting. The note was undated. It read, "Filed report March 12, 1954. Gray man gone. Must file again. Afraid I Will Forget. Carol donated the note to the Snohomish County Historical Society. It is currently stored with other materials related to Edgar Pruitt. The man in gray was never found. His identity was never determined. No record of his employment exists. No family ever came forward. Both incident reports remain on file. Both are dated March 12, 1954. Both are signed by Edgar Pruitt. One was filed in 1954. The other arrived in 1979, 18 years after Pruitt's death. The note is still in the archive. Must file. Again, afraid I will forget. The cold came for everything except one building, and no one inside could remember why. The White River descends from the western flanks of Mount Rainier, cutting through dense forest and steep valleys before joining the Puyallup River near the town of Buckley, Washington. The area has been logged since the late 1800s. The terrain is challenging. Winter weather is severe. Temperatures regularly drop below freezing from November through March. Snow accumulation can exceed 10 feet in higher elevations. Logging camps in the region operated seasonally, closing when conditions became too dangerous. Most camps were built with minimal insulation, designed for temporary occupation during warmer months. In January of 1963, a logging camp known as White River Station 7 operated approximately 14 miles southeast of Greenwater, accessible only by a narrow forest road. The camp housed 18 men and consisted of 5 bunkhouses, a mess hall, an equipment shed, and a small office. The structures were simple wood frame buildings with minimal heating. The camp was scheduled to close in late February. Operations were winding down. On the evening of January 23rd, a cold front moved through the region. Temperatures dropped rapidly. By midnight, thermometers at the camp registered 12 degrees Fahrenheit. By dawn on January 24th, the temperature had fallen to -8 degrees. The camp foreman, a man named Albert Kowalski, ordered the crew to suspend operations and focus on keeping warm. The crew gathered in the mess hall. The wood stove was stoked. Men brought blankets from the bunkhouses. Kowalski radioed the company office in Enumclaw to report the situation. The office advised him to keep the crew sheltered and wait for the cold to pass. Weather reports predicted the temperature would rise within 48 hours. By mid-morning on January 24th, the cold had intensified. The temperature dropped to -18 degrees. Water lines froze. The mess hall stove struggled to maintain warmth. Kowalski made a decision. He divided the crew among the 5 bunkhouses, instructing them to stay inside and conserve heat. Each bunkhouse had a small wood stove. Kowalski distributed firewood and told the men to keep the stoves burning. Kowalski assigned himself and 2 other men to Bunkhouse 3, located at the southern edge of the camp. He assigned 3 men each to the other 4 bunkhouses. The men retreated to their assigned buildings at approximately 11 in the morning on January 24th. On the morning of January 27th, the temperature rose to 22 degrees. The cold front had passed. Kowalski emerged from Bunkhouse 3. He walked to the mess hall. The door was frozen shut. Ice had formed on the exterior walls. He moved to the other bunkhouses. All of them were frozen. Ice coated the windows. The doors were sealed with frost. Kowalski returned to Bunkhouse 3 and woke. The other 2 men, a logger named Dennis Calloway and a cook named Victor Ramirez. He told them what he had seen. The 3 of them walked through the camp. Every structure except Bunkhouse 3 was frozen solid. The equipment shed door had cracked from the cold. The office windows had shattered. The other 4 bunkhouses showed no signs of life. Kowalski and the others forced open the door to Bunkhouse 1. Inside, they found 3 men huddled together under blankets. The men were alive but suffering from severe hypothermia. The wood stove was cold. The firewood was gone. Kowalski and his group carried the men to Bunkhouse 3, which was warm. The interior temperature was 68 degrees. Over the next hour, Kowalski's group opened the other frozen bunkhouses. All 12 men inside were alive, all suffering from hypothermia to varying degrees. All were brought to Bunkhouse 3. The building remained warm despite the number of occupants and the open door. Kowalski examined the wood stove in Bunkhouse 3. It was cold. No fire had been burning. He checked the walls and floor for heat sources. There were none. He touched the walls. They were warm to the touch, approximately room temperature. The windows were clear. No frost. No ice. Kowalski asked Calloway and Ramirez if they remembered how they had kept warm. Both said they did not remember. Calloway said he remembered entering the bunkhouse on January 24th. His next clear memory was Kowalski waking him on January 27th. Ramirez said the same. 3 days had passed, but neither man recalled anything from that time. The men from the other bunkhouses were treated for hypothermia. Several required medical evacuation. A helicopter arrived later that day and transported the most severe cases to a hospital in Tacoma. The remaining men stayed at the camp overnight. All of them slept in Bunkhouse 3. The building remained warm without any heating source. On January 28th, Kowalski radioed the company office and reported the incident. The office sent a supervisor, a man named Douglas Fenton, to investigate. Fenton arrived on January 29th. He inspected all the structures. Bunkhouse 3 was still warm. The other buildings had thawed, but showed significant damage from the freeze. Fenton interviewed Kowalski and the crew. He asked Kowalski why Bunkhouse 3 had remained warm. Kowalski said he did not know. Fenton asked if there was anything unusual about the building's construction. Kowalski said no. It was identical to the other bunkhouses. Fenton asked the men who had stayed in Bunkhouse 3 if they remembered anything from the 3 days. None of them did. Fenton asked if they had felt unusual while inside the building. Calloway said he felt normal. Ramirez said the same. A third man, a logger named Thomas Garrett, said he remembered feeling tired, but nothing else. Fenton arranged for a building inspector to examine Bunkhouse 3. The inspector, a man named Leonard Briggs, visited the site on February 2nd. Briggs examined the structure. He found no hidden heat sources, no electrical wiring, no geothermal vents. The building was a simple wood frame structure, insulated with sawdust and tar paper, identical to the others. Briggs measured the interior temperature, 68 degrees. He measured the exterior temperature, 34 degrees. He placed thermometers in multiple locations inside and outside the building. The interior remained consistently warmer than the exterior. Briggs could not explain it. Briggs wrote a report dated February 7, 1963. The report stated that Bunkhouse 3 exhibited anomalous thermal properties. He recommended further investigation, but noted that the building posed no safety hazard. The report was filed with the company and the county building department. The logging camp closed in late February as scheduled. The bunkhouses were left standing. In March, a university researcher named Dr. Harold Quincy read about the incident in a local newspaper. Quincy was a physicist specializing in thermodynamics. He contacted the timber company and requested permission to study Bunkhouse 3. The company granted permission. Quincy visited the site in April. The building was still warmer than the surrounding structures. Quincy set up temperature monitoring equipment and left it in place for 2 weeks. The data showed that the interior temperature remained between 65 and 70 degrees, regardless of exterior conditions. Quincy examined the building materials. He took samples of the wood, insulation, and tar paper. Laboratory analysis showed nothing unusual. The materials were standard for logging camp construction. Quincy wrote a paper describing the phenomenon. The paper was submitted to a physics journal in June. The journal rejected it, stating that the findings lacked a plausible mechanism. Quincy continued to monitor the building over the following months. The anomaly persisted through the summer and into the fall. In November, the temperature inside the building dropped suddenly to match the exterior temperature. The anomaly ended. Quincy wrote a follow-up report dated December 3, 1963. He stated that the thermal anomaly had ceased and could not be explained by known physical principles. He recommended that the building be preserved for future study. The timber company declined. The camp was dismantled in 1964. Bunkhouse 3 was torn down along with the other structures. In 1978, a journalist named Sandra Kowalczyk was researching unexplained phenomena in Washington state. She came across Quincy's papers in university archives. She contacted Quincy, who was retired. Quincy confirmed the details and provided copies of his reports and data. Kowalczyk interviewed several men who had been at the camp during the incident. Dennis Calloway said he still had no memory of the 3 days he spent in Bunkhouse 3. "I remember going in," he said. "I remember Kowalski waking me up. Everything in between is blank." Thomas Garrett said the experience had troubled him for years. "It's not that I forgot," he said. "It's like those 3 days didn't happen. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't awake. I just wasn't." Victor Ramirez, the cook, said he had tried to rationalize it. "I thought maybe we were all just exhausted and slept through it. But 3 days, with no food, no water, and we all woke up fine. It doesn't make sense." Kowalczyk wrote an article about the incident. It was published in a regional magazine in 1979. The article included interviews and excerpts from Quincy's reports. It attracted modest attention, but no scientific follow-up. In 2007, a paranormal research group visited the former site of White River Station 7. They used thermal imaging cameras. The area where Bunkhouse 3 had stood showed a temperature differential of approximately 5 degrees warmer than the surrounding ground. The researchers documented the finding but offered no explanation. In 2015, a hiker reported finding the concrete foundation of an old building in the area. The hiker sat on the foundation to rest. He later told a ranger that the foundation was warm, noticeably warmer than the ground around it. The ranger visited the site. He confirmed the temperature difference. No explanation was determined. Albert Kowalski died in 1989. Before his death, he gave an interview to a local historian. He was asked about Bunkhouse 3. "I've thought about it every winter since," he said. "The cold came for all of us. But it couldn't get into that building, and we don't remember why. The site is now overgrown. No structures remain. But the ground is still warm where Bunkhouse 3 once stood, warmer than it should be, warmer than the forest around it. The cold chose everything except that one place, and the reason remains unknown.